Welcome back to the Minuteman Initiative and Happy New Year. It's the first episode of 2024, and we're going to get in and get after it. Today we are going to be talking about Vehicular Reconnaissance, kind of continuing our reconnaissance episodes that we've been doing. If you haven't listened to any of those other episodes, I encourage you to go check them out. We had a Reconnaissance Basics Part 1 and 2 way back when, and then more recently, a few episodes ago, you'll see that we did Rural and Urban Reconnaissance. In the beginning of this episode, we talk about some kind of local political community events that have been going on here for us. It's very fresh. It's things we've literally been dealing with for the past few days and today when we're recording. So if you want to skip past that, just know that's going to be in the beginning, but I think it's definitely worthwhile to listen to and kind of hear our experiences on how we're dealing with that. And we have more to follow on that. But getting specifically into the episode, again, we will be getting into vehicular reconnaissance, and it's such an important part of the overall reconnaissance mission, and I think it's a pretty applicable capability to the modern Minuteman. So anyways, I hope you had a great 2023, and we look forward to getting into the new year, so enjoy the episode. Happy New Year.
Yes, the year of 2024.
The craziest year of them all.
Well, they keep getting weirder, so.
They are getting weirder, and we're rolling into an election year, supposedly. We'll see if we even have an actual election now that we got states just willy-nilly pulling people off the ballot, referencing some random amendment clause that just doesn't actually make any sense.
Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes. It's already it's a pretty dangerous precedent there that old Colorado set. Honestly, probably an episode we should tear into at some point. But
yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, regardless of who the person is that they're removing off the ballot, that's just it's a red flag. It makes me want to just naturally vote for that person even more,
dude.
Because it's like, what is that person doing that's creating so many waves that they're literally getting removed off people's ballots?
I guess if they're not on the ballot, what do you do? Just write in?
Yeah, I guess you could write them in, but I don't know what the rule is on that. Like, is that person completely disqualified from receiving any votes as well, or is it just like,
I don't think
we're going to bank off the fact that no one's going to vote for them because you actually have to write them in?
Yeah, I mean, you'd definitely you'd get less votes for sure.
Yeah, because people are idiots,
willing to do their homework and due diligence to figure things out. But yeah, man, wrapping up 2023, pretty crazy year. Lots of things happened. And ending 2023 with some crazy stuff. I'm going to get into some kind of more local news here for a little bit, just to kind of bring people up to speed on why we've been kind of late on the podcast. There's been a lot of other things going on. Obviously, it was the holidays, so we took a little break in general across the board. So closed the shop for a few days. Honestly, not very long, but long enough. Stephen and I needed to spend some time with our families, and we had family in town, which was a lot of fun. Got to spend time with them and got to make some awesome food and hang out, fellowship, all that good stuff. But we actually planned to get this podcast recorded prior to the end of the new year, but there was just a lot of things going on. And this morning, even today, we were going to start this a lot earlier, and there's just this has just been continually rolling and updating and changing. So, and what I'm referring to is a pretty unfortunate thing that seems to be trending around the nation, and yes, even here on the Kenai Peninsula, which is a very traditional and conservative area for the most part. One of our local cities, the city of Soldotna, scheduled, and at the Soldotna Library, I should say, there was a scheduled story hour reading to kids by drag queens. So that whole stupid thing again. So at a public taxpayer-funded facility, they do have like rental rooms available, and apparently one of the local pride organizations rented that facility to host a drag queen story hour, and the reader goes by the super respectable and wonderful name of Ivana Kissacock. So just nothing wrong can be with that, right? There's nothing bad can come of
that's sarcasm for those that for either foreigners or
autistic. No, I'm being very sarcastic. As immediately an event targeted at specifically children, bedtime stories, story hour at the public library, being read by a female impersonator, somebody that is wearing scantily clad female clothing, that's a man, going by the stage name of Ivana Kissacock, reading to kids. There's just no way you can convince me that that's a good thing at all. So immediately, once we found out about this, we started doing what we do. We started rallying people. There's some other community members. Shout out to Josh, who is one of the owners of Cold Frontier Tactical. He's always been a huge player in this fight against this stuff in our community, and he immediately started calling people, and him and I talked on the phone for combined several hours, probably over the few phone calls that we had together. And he made a plan. He's like, well, let's get people together. Let's spread the word. Let's go there and fill that library up with Christian men that know this is wrong, and let's stand against this. That was the plan. And kind of still is the plan. So basically the community, we helped spread that around. All weekend, it's been nothing but emails and texts and calls and people reaching out to me. Did you hear about this? It's like, yep, be there at this time, all this stuff going on. Well, the worst part is that sounds like there's more information coming out that the city of Soldotna, because they're claiming that they didn't know about it or they weren't sponsoring it, blah, blah, blah. But it looks like from what's available on their website that they intentionally hid the actual event. They had the time schedule blocked out and it just says private event. But then you've got all these other events that are specifically named that are pretty mundane. It's like Lego time and, whatever prayer, and they're all specifically named, and you can look at the description. But this specific event was intentionally listed as private event, and it didn't have any information on it. So, pretty obvious intentional deceit. Yeah. So, anyways, lots of people got involved. I'm actually very proud of the community, and it's proof. And again, this will be this podcast is going to go a completely different direction. We're going to be talking about vehicular reconnaissance today. So if you want to skip forward to that, just bounce forward. But honestly, we really wanted to talk about this as it's fresh. But we'll do a whole another episode on these things later because it's very relevant to not just our community, but communities abroad. And you can absolutely make a difference. We got engaged in this last year when there was and we've talked about this on the podcast as well, when there was a drag queen simulated striptease that took place in a public park with a kids playground in it. The community was not happy about that. And we spent 9 months going to the city council trying to lobby for change. And basically we're met with no results at the end of all that. And now we've got this, and it's very clear that the city of Soldotna very well knew about it, and basically hid it from the public. It wasn't in the information available as far as looking up events that are coming up, which is a problem. And again, the event was technically not private. It was a private space was rented, but that private space is paid for and funded by taxpayers. And it's hard to explain unless you've been to Soldotna Library, but it's not really a private space. It was very intended to be at the library, openly at the library, and the event itself was open to anybody. It was open invite to the public.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a thin veil of privacy. Now, you have the right to do what you want to do. I don't want to make that clear, even if it is something that I don't agree with. But again, like, for example, there was a few other events happening that were happening at private businesses. Great. I'm not going to support those businesses financially anymore, but I'm not going to show up either. But to a place that my taxpayers my tax dollars help fund, that's not okay. That's not going to fly, especially when we're talking about, we're not talking about a political or religious difference. We're talking about a devious, intentional indoctrination of children, a demoralizing attack on our most innocent part of our community, which is our children. And you can argue all you want that, it was only the people that would have wanted to go would have gone to that and brought their kids to it. It's like, great, but you're not going to use a taxpayer-funded facility to allow the sacrifice of innocence in the name of some kind of, equality progression. It's like, this is just nasty stuff.
Yeah.
Again, I'll say it again. Someone that goes by the name of Ivana Kissacock reading to kids is just, there's no sensical part of that. It makes no sense to me. And it's clearly and intentionally disgusting.
Yeah.
So, long story short, I'll wrap this up. Sorry, I'm fired up about it. It's fresh. They ended up canceling the event, supposedly. We're still going to go. So for those of you that do listen to this that are local, just know that we are still going to go. We're going to go to the event and just basically pray, meet out there, fellowship, pray, kind of network with some people that otherwise haven't met each other, and better be prepared for when things like this happen again. Again, this isn't new. This is, for some reason, the city of Soldotna is obsessed with allowing, and almost, not officially, not loudly, but basically promoting these events by facilitating it and allowing it to happen, and going as far as to hide the description to avoid backlash. And it's like, are you not listening? The community doesn't want this happening.
Yep, they're not representing the people. They're trying to push for that progressive narrative that so many people are accepting of, especially in the lower 48, unfortunately. But it's they feel the need to push that, and I'm sure if you were to look, financial grants are easier to gain with that narrative already. They've pushed heavily into like the waterfront restoration / like making it better for the community, and that's money, that's financial state money that's needed in order to pull that off. So it's like, who funds that kind of stuff? Well, people that have very woke agendas usually. So unfortunately, so that's I don't know for sure if that's the reason why they're going that route, but I would not be surprised if there's financial gain by pushing those agendas in the city. So
yeah, and this is something that we'll definitely get into later. It's important to talk about. There's been a lot of discussion on in the gun community, kind of gunstagram and stuff about community and what that word really means, and what the actual community, if there is any, should be doing. And I really think it's things like this. A lot of us come together because of a shared interest or love for firearms and the right to self-defense, and different things like that. And that's great, but there's a darker. I think there's a darker enemy. Well, I know that there's a darker enemy at play, and it's moving quickly. And again, like I just want to bring it up that this is not. We aren't some like woke area This is a very conservative and traditional.
I think in the Kenai Peninsula we have more, and not all veterans are right leaning, but I'm just gonna kind of paint a picture. We have more veterans per capita than any other community in the United States of America.
Yep.
So it's a very I guess like it's not an area that would necessarily be accepting of that kind of stuff. So
yeah. And again, this is not to silence. That's always the direction. It's like, well, you're silencing a whole people group. It's like, no, we're not silencing anybody. You have the right to go do this stuff, but you don't have the right to, do these really estranged events in a public place without risk of consequences. Like,
yeah,
do you have the right to rent that and do it? Sure, you do. I mean, you do, but we have the right to show up and say we don't like that.
Yeah.
Now, am I going to show up at your house and say we don't like that? No, it's your private domicile, or if you're going to go to a private business, again, that's whatever. I'm not going to show up there. Again, there was 3 total events that scheduled for this weekend. I believe some of them are still scheduled. 2 of which were at private venues. No one cared about that. That's fine. Do your thing. I still don't agree with it, but I'm not going to show up and make a big stink. But as soon as it gets to something that my taxpayer dollars go towards, well, that's where we have a problem. And it's even deeper than that. It's not just that. It's the direct intentional attack that's taking place on the innocence of our children. It's no secret. I mean, the LGBTQ movement is very open and clear about coming for the kids. I mean, there's literally there's been parades and events, and that's been like the chant, we're coming for your kids, we're coming. And it's because they know that the next generation is the way to really bring in this ideology and make it stick. I mean, it's already basically stuck because of all the complacency we've had. But we bring all this up to say that we hear all the time through emails and other conversations we've been a part of that people feel like their voice doesn't matter. No, it absolutely does. It just takes a little effort, takes a little coordination, takes a little bit of time, takes some research, but you can absolutely grassroots a movement together and shut things down, which is basically what we did. All in a peaceful manner. No one was.
And by
no
we, I mean the community, not me and Jacob.
Yeah, our community here rallied together with the help of many. It wasn't like it was. I appreciate you saying that.
I just don't want to sound like we're taking credit for something.
No, it is honestly the most. Yeah, it was a joint effort for sure by numerous people in the community. One of the local radio stations, which is a pretty conservative radio station, was harping on it really, really big actually this morning, trying to shut stuff down. So, it was, it's definitely a community effort, but the point I'm making is that, a lot of people I think spend time thinking that their voice doesn't matter. They can't do anything. Well, you absolutely can. And if it doesn't seem like anybody's doing anything, it's actually funny. I was just talking to Sky Pirate Actual, Marcus over at Sky Pirate Actual on Instagram. I was just talking to him the other day about this. He said, I think everybody's just waiting for somebody to do something, and I'm at the point where I just want to do something now. And I said, I think life is basically just sitting back wondering, why doesn't somebody do something about this? And then at some point you just realize, oh, I guess I have to do something about this.
Yeah.
And so, if you're not seeing any action, then step up and take the action. It's amazing what you can get done just by contacting the right people, sending some emails, and generating some momentum, and then let that just spread and do its thing. Do it in a respectful and a responsible way. Build in some guidelines that make sense, because there are radicals on every side of the proverbial aisle. You've got people that are obviously super radical on the left, while you've got people that are super radical on the right. If you're going to break it down that black and white, it's far more complicated than that. But there are radical individuals, and you need to be careful not to activate those types of people. And I think a lot of that's done again, at the grassroots level, the individual community member level, you can absolutely shut a lot of that down.
And that goes back to like some of the earlier episodes we've done where we talk about, community growth, like going out and actually meeting your neighbors and meeting other people within your community and knowing, because that's the only way you're going to understand, like, okay, well, this dude's a little bit more intense and maybe we don't need that energy quite yet.
Yeah.
So we'll keep that dude sidelined for now. But then also understanding that you do have people that are capable of tasks that maybe you can't do. So,
for sure.
I think that's just important, understanding like who's in your community and understanding who's got strong suits in what area.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and it actually ties into the whole topic we're doing today because, we've been doing we've been focusing pretty heavily on overall reconnaissance, more in the combat kind of or hostile environment setting.
Yeah.
But we're slowly kind of transitioning into some more civil style reconnaissance, which will be probably more in the next episode. But today, I think dovetails pretty well because of what we're talking about. But it's why reconnaissance and surveillance and those skills are so valuable. And it's not just this austere environment surveillance techniques and tactics that you can use. I mean, again, we talk about that first because, well, for one, it's they're just the raw fundamental skills. It grabs people's interest, I think, a little bit better than most things. But also, it can always be dialed back. Those same fundamentals can be dialed back and used in a more passive, non-combatant way.
Yeah.
So we've been spending a lot of time talking about reconnaissance recently and looking at all the things that happened this last week. It ties in a lot. Having networks built, having ways to notify each other quickly, having eyes out in the community that are paying attention on all fronts. Moral issues almost always cause communities to devolve to the point of conflicts. It's very prevalent in history. So these are important things to stand against, especially for those of you that are Christian men. I know not everybody is, but I know that you know the importance of this. And for those of you that are need a refresher, I'd encourage you to go to Romans 1 and read the whole chapter, and you get a really good refresher by Paul on that and its importance. But so I guess kind of shifting out of that, kind of in summary of that, we'll have, I absolutely think very soon we're going to have new episodes on that. Sorry for the rant, but it's just fresh. It's something we've been dealing with like crazy. And it's just it's the next chapter of the fight against the demoralization of our community, because we've been dealing with this for a while. And our community, I think, is starting to really wake up to how seriously this can progress. Like, what happens next? I mean, we went from, a simulated striptease by a drag queen in a kid's park to now, this guy with this super nasty name is trying to come in dressed all provocatively and read to kids, bedtime stories. It's like, what? And this isn't unique to our community. It's happening everywhere across the country. So we need prayer. And
the power of prayer, man.
That's huge. Like, I think it was prayer as a combination, absolutely, of prayer and just absolute outspoken backlash for this event to get canceled, which it has supposedly been canceled now. But again, we're going to still show up, and one, because some people are worried that it's a false cancellation and they're going to try to just slip it in. But two, more importantly, it's to show up and really pray over it and connect with people and continue the community networking, which is really important. So
absolutely.
But anyways, we will push into that, and maybe I can reference a minute mark or something in the intro. I don't know if I will or not, but just to know, for people that want to skip ahead. But I think it's important for all of you that consider yourself kind of modern Minuteman to understand that it's not just about these action steps and always preparing for something that may happen. I mean, there's stuff happening right now that I would say is warfare. It's definitely more spiritual warfare, but it's warfare nonetheless. But so Vehicular reconnaissance.
Vehicular reconnaissance. Here we go.
We're going to shift into that.
Yeah, I think to cover first on vehicular reconnaissance, we didn't really do this much in the rural and the urban reconnaissance because we had kind of touched on those in previous podcasts or previous episodes. So it was kind of like understanding the purpose behind it was a little bit more clear, I felt like. But the modern Minuteman application of this is, I feel like, actually pretty vast and it's pretty useful, I would say.
Oh yeah.
Especially for our current time, as modern America has, as we've developed, a lot of things that we do is out of our vehicles. I know there's some big cities that lots of people still walk to commune, but for most of America, I would say that you're in and out of your vehicle traveling.
Yes.
So making that kind of an office space that you can conduct business out of, I think is heavily beneficial.
Yeah, and maybe even further on that, making it a kind of a mobile operations center, so to speak. I mean,
yeah,
a lot of your, even in the EDC, your everyday carry realm, a lot of your equipment, your, surplus medical gear, different preparedness items, some people make go bags and stuff like that they keep in their vehicle. Good. It's a lot of times free. It's a free way to carry your space. I mean, we invest a lot of time being in vehicles because we need them to travel. It's the pretty common and standard way to travel about. But we also invest a lot of money in our vehicles, whether that's owning, renting, leasing, whatever. So you might as well set it up and make it kind of an extension of your home.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great direction to go. So yeah, we're definitely going to touch on some more combatant aspects of this, but we're going to also start to filter in some more like current application and how you can take that information and apply it to kind of currently where we're at. Because again, this episode, because vehicular reconnaissance is it can be very complex, but at the core, what are you doing? Well, you're doing reconnaissance out of your vehicle. So it's pretty simple, fundamentally, but there are some complex elements of this that definitely factor in and change drastically if you're talking about a hostile or combatant environment versus, I'm just going about my life, or maybe it's a non-permissive environment where, you're still allowed to drive around, but things have gotten kind of weird. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, hugely important, especially as you transition into the more civil reconnaissance side of things. So,
absolutely. So we'll get into some of the types of vehicular reconnaissance. The first one we're going to cover is a scout vehicle. Scout vehicles are used for surveying routes. They monitor the activities of enemies. Weapons and armor are modest since they are not designed for fighting. Good observation equipment and quick and light. So that's going to be very much like the cavalry scout. Like if you're familiar with military, like MOS and stuff like that, that's going to be like your cavalry scout platoons. That's kind of how they operate. I got to work alongside of those guys quite a bit, being like a light reconnaissance unit. So we were infantry, but we got to work alongside with those guys quite a bit. But they do that job very well, and it's very much focused on routes and having long range observation to be able to see long distance. Obviously, depending on terrain, you may not be able to allow yourself to gather that information, because if you have really thick vegetation and not like lots of hillsides that you can get up to view from, you're going to be limited. But I think it's understanding this is very militaristic, obviously, but these three different types of vehicular reconnaissance, but understanding kind of their applications will better inform you how to maybe set up your own personal vehicle. Did you want to add anything on the scout vehicles?
No, I mean, you basically just said it, but I would reiterate that these, I guess, characteristics and types can be applied to more civilian type vehicles.
Yeah.
Like we obviously get into like armored and stuff like that when you start talking more combat related. But regardless, there's things that can be applied, and the overall concept can absolutely be applied to personally owned vehicles and stuff like that.
Absolutely. The quick and light, I think, is pretty good to understand. Something that you can get in pretty quietly and be able to move without drawing too much attention. It's kind of tough with vehicles because obviously it's much harder to get in tight compared to like moving as just like individual soldiers. And that's where you're limited on range, I feel like. And understanding your limitations as far as with a vehicle, I think is incredibly important because you're not going to be able to move up to an objective like you can, like just as like on foot. So
yeah,
I think understanding that is important, and that's just going to be something that you're going to have to practice in order to understand like how close can I actually get with a vehicle. Depending on what kind of vehicle it is as well, like it could be loud, it could be, you got lots of different factors that can kind of change your course of action. But
yep.
Combat reconnaissance vehicles, these are going to be like aggressive reconnaissance, so sort of like your reconnaissance by force type movements.
Yeah,
this is going to be kind of similar to that. Like, so seeing how people can attack, because you are going to have this is going to be like heavier wheeled or tracked vehicles. They're going to be armed with pretty heavy firepower and armor if possible. In a military setting, these are obviously going to be armored vehicles.
Yeah.
But for the modern Minuteman, it's kind of tough to armor your vehicle. You can do it. There's DIY type things out there. I'm not going to sit here and say just like modify out a vehicle. Like, you're going to be able to, you can do it, but there's like, just make sure that your vehicle can carry that kind of weight if you're going to do it.
It's far more complicated than I think most people understand. Yeah. And
then another mission for them is fire support for reconnaissance teams. So that's going to be like your foot soldiers. We talked about QRF a lot in the last episodes, the last reconnaissance episodes. This is going to be kind of where your vehicle can play a role in that effort. So if for whatever reason that team needs bailed out, a vehicle is your fastest method of getting in to support that team that needs help. So that's where your QRF is going to come from if you're using a vehicle.
Yep.
And then there's intelligence vehicles, which I kind of think are the coolest, and I think they actually have the most ability from a Minuteman perspective.
Yeah.
Because you're not having to get in as tight, because that's a serious concern, is getting in. Can you get out if you have to bail out? It's not going to be as easy if that's all you have. Like, you're not going to have like air support or something like that can like back you up as you're bailing out.
Right.
And if you do, then holy crap, you're crazy. But your intelligence vehicle is going to monitor enemy communication, artillery fire, and movements. It's going to provide information for strategic level decision making and counter reconnaissance, which the counter reconnaissance part is super important, I think.
Yeah.
This is going to be something that's like basically almost like a roving patrol with a vehicle that's monitoring channels and seeing if they can pick up anything that would be considered a red flag in that area. So you're going to keep that closer to your home base.
Yep.
If you want to push this out a little farther to try to like gather information farther out, you could do that as well. You can kind of use it however you want it, but you're going to have the capabilities in order to pull that off before you try to attack that mission, I guess. So,
yeah. And this is where, things like software-defined radio, like listening devices and observation equipment are going to be super applicable, and they're going to be really easy to use, and you can pretty easily with that in that concept, you can pretty easily modify a vehicle to kind of fit that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So, yeah, I definitely think the kind of a combination between scout vehicle and intelligence vehicle is going to be your most capable platforms from that kind of modern Minuteman perspective.
Yeah, I think so too. Your combat reconnaissance vehicles are going to be it's not fun fighting out of a vehicle that's not like actually set up for that mission.
Yeah.
So like, unless you have like an MRAP or something like that, then or a tank, like tanks are actually used for that role quite a bit. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't understand that, but like tanks are like they're a heavy use for them as reconnaissance gathering, because they can just kind of cruise in. You're not super concerned about them, but they they do a fairly good job, and they have the fire support on board to fight their way out if they need to.
I think the understanding the combat reconnaissance kind of style and that aggressive reconnaissance is important, because it's it might not be as applicable to like a more citizen effort, but it's definitely something that could be used against you. That's actually the background I come from, is a heavy weapons platoon, and we used heavily armored vehicles with anti-tank weaponry attached and mounted, and that was a big part of our mission, was vehicular reconnaissance, QRF missions, and anti-armor. So those are really
they're kind of doing a lot of the same stuff that some of these vehicular reconnaissance type efforts would do. Like even if it's counter reconnaissance, it's still reconnaissance nonetheless. So and in a future episode, we'll get into like more vehicle TTPs and tactics and stuff like that. But we're going to get into some today. But I think it's definitely going to be with an overarching reconnaissance perspective. So So talking about some of the vehicle types, there's a lot of vehicle types out there, but I'm just going to kind of go through it and talk about maybe some pros and cons of different type of vehicles that you may have or may want to use for this role. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, personal vehicle, the old POV, dude. The pros of this is going to be like for a more civil type thing, it's not going to stick out a lot. So if you're driving around a blue Toyota Corolla, you're looking pretty normal, I'd say. Maybe not up here if you're driving around like a truck, it's pretty normal. So you gotta, honestly, dude, if you want to look like this typical dude around here, just drive a Dodge Ram truck, and you're like about the most average person there is. This is one of the most important vehicle types to really lean into, I think, because a personally owned or privately owned vehicle, even if you've got like a spare car that you don't use very much, that's the thing too, is you potentially want it to be something that isn't identifiable to you. So if you do live in a small community, that's pretty common to where a lot of people know what you drive, and they affiliate you with that vehicle. So having a vehicle that people aren't used to seeing you in. Burner vehicle.
Yeah, dude. And this is where buying a $800 jalopy could be kind of advantageous. Now you want it to be reliable. You don't want to break down somewhere, but being able to kind of just disappear into the landscape in kind of an old beater car and kind of dressed as an old, just scrappy dude might be advantageous depending on what you're doing. So there's a lot of, you can use your imagination here and get creative, because that creates more variables, and I think it makes it better. But don't sleep on the personal vehicle. I think a lot of people start thinking of, and I see it all the time, people start thinking about this and they're like, I'm going to make a like a doomsday vehicle. And they start trying to make something out of like Mad Max. Dude, that's going to look like the most ridiculous thing. And anytime you drive that around, everyone is going to look at you and be like, what is that? So you're not sneaking around anywhere in that. You're not low profile,
There's nothing wrong with the minivan, dude.
Yeah, dude. There's a time and dude, minivans are randomly OP when it comes to this kind of stuff, dude. You can deploy out that big sliding door, dude.
Yep.
And just do what you need to do, dude. You could run all kinds of big, bulky surveillance equipment inside that thing. You know, a slightly tinted minivan is probably the way.
Yeah.
I would say here in Alaska, it probably needs to be all-wheel drive because the only thing worse than
risking it.
Yeah, the only thing worse than maybe having a slightly beat up, unreliable vehicle is a vehicle that just gets stuck everywhere you go in the wintertime.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, another good thing with the personal vehicle, window tints become super popular.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's not abnormal. So I think that's a smart move to make. You know, tint out the windows. It doesn't have to be so tinted that you're getting pulled over all the time, but tinted enough that someone can't just look in there and identify who you are. Nothing worse than driving around the old fishbowl where literally people can just see what you're doing and when you're picking your nose and all that good stuff. But,
yeah.
Dude,
just big domed glass looking like the new moon rover, dude.
Yeah.
Just lomping around.
I love having tinted windows too.
Yeah.
Like it's just nice. Yep. I feel like I can check things out without feeling like I'm just literally just staring into someone's soul, like next to me.
Some people argue that it's an identifiable thing, and that it can kind of give you away. But I would agree with what you just said, Stephen, is that it's become so popular, it's so commonplace now that I don't think it is. And you don't need to do any fancy tint, like just a little bit darker that keeps that light from transmitting through there so easily, or transitioning through there. That that it backlights you or illuminates you and everyone can see that you're in there with a camera or whatever. But another thing you can use is, again, it goes with the minivan theme, which is those like little window shades.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The little
kid
suction cup window shades for, and dude, just go take the full dive, like baby on board,
take
put
the full dive and the baby's day out, dude.
Yeah, man. Like I'm telling you, the mom van vibe is epic reconnaissance. I'm telling you, OP, overpowered reconnaissance. You don't want to get too crazy with the identifiable features because if you start getting seen around often, but maybe having a menagerie of of mom type vehicles, dude, might be the way. So
you're either gonna look like you know what you're doing, or you're gonna look like you're trying to steal children.
Oh no!
Shout out to Baby's Day Out. Oh no, dude. Yep. Anyways, so next vehicle I'm going to get into, people are going to love it, dude, because I know this community is just raging with just all the abundance. The off-road / overland vehicles.
Yeah. I have a tent on top of my truck.
Yeah, dude. They've all been waiting for us to say this, and they're like, finally, I can justify my purchase.
Look at my Toyota Tacoma.
Yeah.
Or not Tacoma,
or even better yet, dude, the vans, dude. The van overland community goes hard, dude.
It does go hard. But not the Toyota Tacoma. Which one am I thinking of? What do they always use for those overlander builds? I mean, people use Tacomas all the time, but the
Ford Rangers?
No, it's like a SUV, the Toyota.
Oh, the 4Runner.
4Runner, yeah. And the FJ as well.
Yeah, the FJ is sick too.
Yeah.
Anyways, so these are great scout vehicles, obviously. Fast, light.
Yep.
Kind of move into places that maybe you can't move into with other vehicles, or at least you should be able to move into places that you can't move into with other vehicles, because that's kind of the point, I think. They're sick. They're kind of set up to sustain out of for a long time already. They're preset that way, or they're not preset. You usually build them out that way because that's kind of like the idea behind it. So, you have a lot of that kind of gear focused in that area, and all you need to do is add on some other gear to help, I guess, prolong the mission and give you the ability to actually do the job. Because obviously you're going to be able to survive out of it for a long time now. You just need the equipment to gather intelligence and actually do surveillance with.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to talk about them too long. I will say this about both the off-road and overland and the personal vehicle a lot of times you're not dealing with a big fuel tank on any of those vehicles, so having spare fuel is super smart with those. And a lot of the overland guys already think that way to begin with, because a lot of like your, Tacomas and 4Runners and your smaller, lighter vehicles aren't going to have a huge gas tank. So having the ability to either extend that mileage or whatever, that's something to take into consideration, because you're not traveling very far with those.
Yeah.
I personally own a Toyota Tacoma, so I know that you're not getting a lot on one gas tank. So
yeah. And also just know that this type of vehicle, although it's a very capable type of vehicle, I think it falls in that very mission specific category, because this is kind of in that direction of that Doomsday / Mad Max style vehicle. It's not as crazy, but if you don't live in an area where these are prevalent and common vehicles, then it's going to, again, stick out like a sore thumb. Yeah. They are pretty common here. They're common in places, like Colorado and Wyoming, and there's a lot of places that these are relatively common. There's even places where you can commonly rent them, which is interesting. But that opens up a whole other list of possibilities. But I think just big picture, just understand, the image that type of vehicle could send. Now, if you need to go somewhere very remote and rural, then this is going to be hard to beat. It's going to be capable. It can be well set up. It can be somewhat configured. So definitely a cool vehicle. But just understand that, like, if you're trying to do vehicular reconnaissance in like a city, then something like this is probably not the move.
Yeah. So, our next vehicle that I wanted to cover was like your diesel trucks or heavy equipment. Obviously, your heavy equipment's going to stand out a little bit depending on where you're operating it at.
Just pulling vehicle reconnaissance with an excavator.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
But this is going to kind of fall into where this kind of shines is if you're planning on, loading it down, whether that's with troops or armor or gear or whatever it may be, your load bearing with a diesel vehicle is usually substantially greater than like your gas vehicle. I just wanted to bring that up because they do have their place. There's a lot of diesel trucks up here, and I don't feel like that would be like any sort of red flag. Obviously, they're going to be a little louder and things like that. But even nowadays, diesel trucks are pretty quiet in the grand scheme. You got like your turbo whistle and things like that you may be concerned about, but most vehicles that military are operating for this kind of mission type are diesel vehicles. So, and
they are loud.
Yeah.
It's actually, again, back to some of my background using vehicles a lot, we would often, if we were trying to sneak up on an objective, we would have to dismount and leave our vehicles sometimes over mile and a half away.
Yeah.
And sometimes you could still hear them in the background, just,
rumbling
over a mile away, just so we could get up on the objective, with some discretion, and be kind of covert. So that was very common because of how loud they were. But then sometimes it didn't matter. We again were at the time we were a, kind of the big dogs on the block, so a lot of times we'd roll in there and kind of loud and proud and do it that way too. So which would be more of your kind of aggressive reconnaissance or reconnaissance by force, just kind of go in, taking over, setting up security, and just figuring out what you need to figure out. That's perspective too. But yeah, diesel vehicles, it's again a very common vehicle here where we live, very, very common. So not out of the norm, but something to pay attention to. I actually think too that it's a vehicle that's better well suited to continuously run. They're very good at running for long periods of time. For example, a lot of diesel vehicles and equipment up on the North Slope runs all winter long, basically. It's very rare for them to shut them down unless they need to do maintenance or something like that. I think now, and I'm not an expert on this, but I think now they have like cycles where they'll let them run for a certain amount of time and then rotate them out and let them like cool down or whatever. But back when like the pipeline and stuff was being built, I mean, you had like heavy equipment ran, all winter long without being turned off because they were worried they wouldn't be able to start it again if they turned it off. So, just because of how cold it was, but
going back to that cold weather warfare, dude.
Yeah. So with that being said, I mean, they're very capable, equipment, machines, vehicles, but they require usually a lot more maintenance and stuff too to keep them running. So, but yeah.
Yep. Another vehicle type. So I just kind of lumped all these in together, but, vans, buses, and motorhomes.
Dude, motorhomes.
Yeah, dude.
I feel like you can pull some secretive stuff off in a motorhome.
Dude, yeah, definitely up here.
Jesse!
No, dude. We're not talking about that kind of secretive stuff.
Yo, Mr. White. It's science. No.
Yeah, oh, man. These are great for your intelligence vehicles. Due to the space, you can operate pretty awesomely in them and store equipment for the mission. But you can also cook meth in them.
Yeah.
Jacob's just over there chuckling at himself.
Oh, so stupid. I don't even know where that came from, dude. That's a good show, though.
I mean, kind of.
I mean, it's a bad show, but yeah, it's a pretty raunchy show, but the plot's really good. Anyways.
Yeah. Anyways. Vans, buses, and motorhomes.
Yeah.
Motorhome's kind of like, dude, if you have an old man to just operate a motorhome, no one's ever going to question what's going on in the back of that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, dude. Like, again, depending on where you live, but it's another vehicle that up here is so common.
In the summertime, for sure, yeah.
They're
winter
so
time,
common.
Not as much, but even in the winter.
Yeah. I think if you live in like the UK or like you're a foreign listener, I think they probably call them caravans. I think is what they call them over there, not motorhomes. But
oh, really?
Yeah, I think so. The only reason I'd know that is because I can just hear Jeremy Clarkson being like, "Oh no, it's another caravan," just on Top Gear, just like getting super mad about it. He hated it.
Oh, dude.
I'm pretty sure they were called caravans, but
yeah,
dude, I miss that show so much. I feel like they would have done an episode on Vehicular Reconnaissance.
Yeah, dude. They probably did do one.
And now on Top Gear, Vehicular Reconnaissance.
Yeah.
What will James May do next? It's so dumb.
They did do like battle vehicles or something on
there. I think they did.
And they were like trying to destroy each other. Out? I don't know, dude. That was so random.
Those blokes, dude. Some randoms, but they're funny.
Yeah. So next category. This is not something that a lot of people are going to have. Actually, these next two categories. But your planes and helicopters, so your air assets.
Yeah.
Obviously, depending on what's going on in the world, these could be very useful or just probably not a good idea to begin with. Your ability to fly gets shut down pretty quick in like big disaster type events. So just going willy-nilly up in your Super Cub to fly around is probably a poor choice, and you're going to get shot down by fighter jets. So, yeah, I'm just saying, like,
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, understanding the ability and honestly, like for our Alaska listeners, there's a lot of planes up here. Like a lot of people personally own planes, so it's not like, yeah, it's kind of rare, but it's not super rare to our area for whatever reason.
No, it's
like
not
I know
at all.
Probably more people that personally own planes than I would say any of the dudes I served with because they're all from the lower 48 and they don't know anyone.
You're saying you know more people that own planes than they do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
For a second, it sounded like you meant like you know more people here that own planes.
Well,
than
I'm just
people
thinking
in the
like
military
so like guys that I
owned.
know from outside of Alaska.
Yeah. It's very unique to Alaska, I think.
The military kind of gives you a wide spread of like individuals that live all over the U.S.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm just thinking like, how many of those guys probably knew guys who personally own planes? Probably not very many. Like maybe a handful.
Dude, if you have buddies with planes, start thinking about how to utilize that. That's such a powerful capability. I mean, it is very common here, so it's probably like most people listening are probably like, dude, I don't know anybody that privately owns a plane. It's so common here that people have like carved in on their property, little personal landing strips and stuff like
everywhere. And people like I know a guy that has a, everyone's obsessed with like the shop house.
Yeah.
He literally has a, like a,
yep.
What am I looking for? A hangar.
Yeah.
A hangar home.
Yeah.
And he's got multiple planes in there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like...
It's actually so cool.
It's super cool.
Yeah, it's super common here where you got like a hangar, like the whole downstairs is a shop/hangar, and then they have like an apartment attached to it, like above it or attached or whatever. So, very common. And actually more attainable than you'd think too. It sounds like it's just astronomically expensive, and it is. I'm not saying it's cheap, but it's not, especially with people commonly building their own places here. You see it a lot.
Helicopters are a little more rare up here, but...
Yeah, helicopters in general are astronomically more expensive to operate and do maintenance on than fixed-wing aircraft, especially simple like, your more bush planes like Cubs and,
I think
Cessnas.
I only know one
like
dude
that.
who personally owns helicopters, and he lives in Texas, so...
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't even live here, so that's...
Yeah, and he owns some nice helicopters, too.
Yeah.
Like, those are not even like... It's not like a Robinson. Like he has like McDonnell Douglas, like little bird type airplane, helicopters.
Yeah, they're sick.
But
anyways, so the air asset thing, it's hard to stay concealed in the sky. I mean, there's always that fear. You're kind of just out in the middle of nowhere. You can use cloud coverage and things like that, but it's much more difficult to stay concealed out in an open space versus with a vehicle and some thick terrain or whatever it may be, or just blending in because you fit in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you're just a normal looking car that's driving through the city, just like everyone else is. Now, if you're just a normal looking car that's driving through like an abandoned city, then that's obviously you're not really fitting in at that point. So
yeah,
I feel like common sense just let's lean on that heavily.
Yeah. Which is why it all comes back to this is a part. This is a method of reconnaissance. And there's a reason we started with rural and urban dismounted reconnaissance, because it's,
if you gotten to that point where it's that bad, you're probably not in a vehicle because you're not getting fuel.
Yeah, and if you drive out into an area that you're having to try to surveil, then you're going to be counter surveilled and probably targeted.
Yeah.
Yep.
So my next category is boats.
Whoa.
Boats are another one. It's kind of rare, but weirdly, a lot of people in Alaska have it. I think it's just because a lot of people like to fish up here, and it's a big fishing state, so we have boats. And I'm not just talking. Some people have river boats, some people have ocean boats. There's a lot of different types of boats. So you got your little, your little Johnson lake boat. That's not really what I'm talking about because that's random. I guess you could use it though if you want to pretend like you're fishing and gather reconnaissance on some dude in the local park. I don't know.
Yeah,
that's pretty random. But hey, do what you gotta do. But yeah, so very much like the sky, the water's an open area. You're not really concealing yourself unless you're like bebopping through the rivers. You're living down in Louisiana, like where those guys
the
like
bayous, dude.
Yeah, dude, those guys are like. Those guys could blend in probably because they're out there smashing around, dude.
I always remember that. What's that movie? Not The Fugitive, but it's the same.
U.S. Marshals.
Yeah, U.S. Marshals.
Dude, we're going back to that. We've referenced
we talked
before.
about it before, dude. Oh, crazy.
You're with me.
Who knows these rivers? Or who knows these swamps? That guy just spits a loogie. I'm with you.
Yeah.
That's a good movie, man.
It is. But yeah, that's if you live in that kind of area, boats kind of come in clutch. I also think back to like when what was it? Texas had all those floodings and like people were like using boats to like go around and like save people off rooftops and things like that.
Yeah, literally just going down like the streets in boats.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I mean, that's obviously. I mean, it's I guess depending on you may have had to do some reconnaissance in order to find people, but I'm just saying like there's a benefit to having some of these vehicles outside of the reconnaissance realm. Mm-hmm. So like a search and rescue type outfit, boats and planes obviously come in pretty capable.
Yeah.
Amphibious vehicles. These are this is a wide category that a lot of people don't have either. Some of them Louisiana folk probably have some amphibious vehicles, but
yep.
We have a few that have, like, a lot of guys have Argos and things like that up here.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit more land driven versus water driven. Then you got some amphibious vehicles that are a little bit more water driven that can go on the land, like those airboats and stuff like that.
Yeah, those I don't know if I'd even consider those amphibious. They have the capability to
go
blast around on the land if they need to. I mean, I guess that's the definition of being amphibious, but
yeah,
they're I think it's more for like short stints, whereas those Argos are like truly amphibious. Like they can cruise around wherever, and then they can motor around in the water too. I'll tell you what though, they're a slow, non-maneuverable thing in the water. It's definitely a like an off-road vehicle that can go in water. It's not. It doesn't have very many boat attributes, dude.
No, it floats. It floats. That's what it's got going for it.
Have you ever been in one in the water?
No.
It's random, dude. They're bobbing around. It's like being in a paddle boat, kind of. Where you're like,
you're kicking.
You're like, you're like, how am I not going anywhere? It's kind of like that, but you don't have to pedal it. It's just the wheels are out there, just kind of doing whatever they do, just not giving you a lot of propulsion.
That's kind of ridiculous, isn't it?
What do you mean?
I don't know. It's retarded, kind of.
They're cool, dude. I think if I could.
You actually look at military like vehicles built for the reconnaissance mission, pretty much all of them are amphibious, though. Yeah. And there's a reason for that.
Oh, yeah.
It's because they can pretty much escape from any direction. They don't get trapped behind bodies of water.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I got to evacuate this direction. And it's like your overland vehicle is just going to be like, well, this sucks because I can't go that way. Like, I'm just, like, my snorkel only goes so high, guys. So.
Yeah.
I hope this river isn't that deep.
Dude, I mean, I know we already covered boats, but just vehicle-borne stuff I think is pretty underrated.
It's underrated, but it's also, I think a lot of people think that it depends on who you ask. I think some people think it's, like, way overpowered, too. Like, oh, yeah, I can just jump in my truck and do this. Like, dude, depending on what's going on, you might not be able to do that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think...
I mean, I'm just thinking, like, if you live in an area that's got a ton of, like, river access and,
boats, you're saying?
I said boats, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I said I think boats are, like, undervalued for this mission sometimes. Like, you look at the, definitely a more militaristic example, but you look at, like, the SEAL community and how heavily they rely on, like, boat insertion and exfil and stuff. And
yeah.
I'm just thinking about, like, the SWIC teams and stuff. And I know that's not reconnaissance, but it's more like QRF. But, dude, I mean, there's a lot of... I feel like there's feasible...
Yeah, but then that's going back to that combat reconnaissance vehicles. So
true.
Even in a QRF element, that's still a form of reconnaissance.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think the boats are... I mean, you can move pretty quietly. You can cut motor, especially if you're talking about river. Like if you're using the direction of the river to travel, you can move super quietly, and especially if you're talking about under night.
Yeah.
If you know what you're doing in a boat, dude.
Yeah, and then there's even like I know there's a lot of special units that use like kayaks and stuff like that.
Oh, dude, I thought we were going canoes, dude. I was like, heck yeah.
Well, canoes too, I think.
Just out there in the skidoo, dude.
Those foldable lightweight kayaks, I'm trying to remember who builds them, but I think
some guys use Zodiacs, dude.
Oh, yeah. Zodiacs. Who's going to carry the boats, dude? Anyways, yeah, but jumping, I didn't mean to go all the way back into boats, but just, I think boats, like, if you have an area that it makes sense, it's actually pretty, there's a lot of possibility there. And a lot of possibility that they could go relatively unnoticed, especially if they're common,
Yeah.
Which, again, boats are another super common. Any outdoor vehicle at all is just common in Alaska. Like,
it's a roadway. Is a body of water is a roadway that's hard to control. You can shut down a man-made road pretty easily, but shutting down river passage is kind of rough in a way. Like, yeah, you can still make choke points.
Yeah.
Someone could if they knew what the heck they were doing. But I'm just talking about for, total fallout, not to the point that you have like militants trying to stop you, but like road system for whatever reason has collapsed or whatever, you're always going to have the ability to move through water. So, well, not always, but most of the time you're going to have the ability to move through water.
Yeah.
But going back to the amphibious vehicles, I think it's just it's a capable vehicle. So if you have one, cool, utilize it. If not, then I wouldn't say. I'm not telling you to go out and buy an amphibious vehicle. I'm not telling you to go out and buy a plane, or I'm just talking about all these vehicles. Understanding that they do have a place in this mission, but understand their pros and understand their cons, and don't try to force them into a role that they can't really do.
Yep.
So, anyways, the cross country or enduro motorcycles.
Whoa, this is actually kind of sick.
All the dirty civilian folks are just wrecked right now.
The who?
the dirty civilian folks.
Did they do content on this or something?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was like, what?
Yeah, they talked about like enduro bikes and like dirt bikes, and
really?
How good they are at reconnaissance.
I didn't see that. That's cool.
I will agree with them, understanding that I agree with the content. I'm just saying, understand the pros and cons. Kind of going back to like, everything has a purpose. It can have a purpose. Don't force it into a role that doesn't need to be forced into. Where these things kind of shine is, they can be on the roadway, and no one's going to bat an eye at you. Even if you're like in a more like civil reconnaissance type thing, you're not going to get pulled over for running them on the road.
Yeah.
Where if you just rode a dirt bike that wasn't street legal, and you can make a dirt bike street legal, and I would say most states. I don't even know if it's all states, but I know you can in Alaska, so I assume you can in other states as well. You just got to go through the procedure and get a license and all that point and all that stuff, but that kind of just turns it into an enduro at that point. But, so it has the ability to travel normally on the road, but it also allows you to kind of dirt bikes can kind of go pretty much anywhere, or enduros. They have a lot of them have the side saddles where you can load out gear. You're obviously going to be way more light than like a standard, vehicle, because you're just not going to have the storage space. But someone rocking a backpack with your overflow boxes on the side of your enduros, you're going to be able to carry quite a bit of gear, like much easier than just rucking it in, and you're going to be able to do it much faster than you would if you were walking in. So what's cool about that too is if you do have a ruck, you can, if you have like a camo net or something like that, you can stage the bike, camo net it, and then move by foot after that. And your bike's more than likely not going to get caught, which is, I think, pretty cool. Your fuel isn't going to last super long though. They do go pretty far mileage wise per like
they're economic.
Yeah. So you're not burning a ton of gas, but they just don't have the tank space to actually like last a long time. So, but yeah, I think they're capable. I think they're super capable. And then getting into 4-wheelers, dirt bikes, snowmobiles, side by sides, kind of all your
all terrain vehicles.
Yeah, your 4x4 and like your typical. I think pretty much in every state there's a lot of people that have these. One of these, you know what I mean, or if not multiple of these.
Yeah.
So, kind of similar to the enduro. They're quick and light. You can kind of move in. You're not going to be able to carry as much gear as you would in a vehicle. Obviously, the side-by-side can carry quite a bit more than like your dirt bike would be able to. And your 4-wheeler's kind of in between somewhere. What's cool is your 4-wheelers are going to be your 4-wheelers, side-by-sides, things like that, your dirt bikes. Dirt bikes not so much, but they're going to be able to operate without too much conversion in wintertime operations. So if you're concerned about snow and things like that, your 4-wheeler can operate in that. It's not going to be great. Your side-by-side can operate in that. It's not going to be great. They have track kits, obviously, and they work pretty good. They work much better than just running wheels. I actually was in one this last, for New Year's. I went out to a cabin, got to ride around on the side-by-side with the track kit and whatnot. But and they do pretty good. They just, you gotta know their limits. They're not like a snow machine. A snow machine just literally dominates in the snow. Or snowmobile for your, that's what they're called pretty much anywhere but Alaska. But that's what I'm talking about when I say snow machine. But yeah, your snowmobile.
Yeah.
We kind of covered this in the cold weather.
Yeah.
Episode that we just did. But yeah, they're going to be able to move light and fast, and it's going to be a good supplemental vehicle for maybe your bigger vehicles as well, which is kind of a cool aspect. Like you can throw these up in the back of a truck and, move as far as you can with the truck, and then send out a smaller detachment from that reconnaissance element on like a dirt bike or a 4-wheeler or a snow machine, to push up farther and maybe some terrain that vehicle can't get through, or you want something a little quicker and lighter to kind of push up. So I think that's kind of a cool aspect with the kind of off-road vehicles. But
yeah, I think it's just like anything. It's all got pros and cons. People, I think it's because whatever people have invested in, that's kind of automatically the direction they want to push into, and they kind of
makes sense.
Tunnel vision into that, which is not a bad thing, because if you have that and you already do own it and you're already using it and you're experienced with it, then see how that applies. But don't get so tunnel visioned on forcing that into that role that you miss out on some more maybe just obvious roles,
Yeah.
So,
but I think it's important to understand the limitations of the vehicle that you plan to operate for this mission type. But so getting into equipment considerations as far as the vehicle is concerned, because I know not everyone knows a ton about this, and some people may be like, well, this is super basic, and it is going to be pretty basic, but some of the same stuff applies to the individual as it would to your vehicle. So as far as reconnaissance is concerned, camouflage is the first thing I kind of want to get into. Camouflage may be as simple as just literally having that blue Toyota Corolla that I was talking about at the beginning of the episode.
Yep.
Just blending into your environment. It may be as simple as that. It also could be like camo nets. You can get camo nets that are the size of vehicles that you can throw over. We used this when we did run vehicles, which we didn't run vehicles much in my background as a scout reconnaissance guy. We use vehicles every once in a while. We also use side-by-sides, but yeah, you would have a camo net that you could cover up and then basically push out, and if you needed to. But we didn't do a ton of it. But yeah, that's a capability. You can also spray paint your vehicle to maybe blend into your environment, depending on kind of like where you're at. Like, obviously, that's going back to that Mad Max talk. Like, hey, you're also kind of creating like a identifiable feature on that on that vehicle. But if you're not planning on ever getting that vehicle exposed, like you're not planning on driving it through the town or anything like that, then that may be a smart move to do, is to spray paint it so it blends into nature a little better. Weapons. This could be literally just what you guys have as your personal weapons in the vehicle. That may be all it is.
And it probably will be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, like large, overt, weapon systems or machine guns or whatever, not only are they super hard to facilitate or to attain.
Yeah.
There's definitely possibilities there, but that's a barrier to entry. But also, it's not always the best thing to have unless you're doing that overt, aggressive reconnaissance. That's a hugely identifiable feature, and it's something that's specifically looked for by counterintelligence or counter surveillance. So
yeah, exactly. You kind of going back to an example is like a lot of the SF teams that operated in Afghanistan and things like that. They use those up armored vehicles, but usually those vehicles were pretty just normal. I mean, they would be like a normal vehicle for that area or whatever. Sometimes they're a little bit nicer looking. But either way, it just looks like a car. You know what I mean? It's not like we got a mounted 50 cal up on the top of it.
Right.
Now, they did have some of those vehicles that did have, machine guns mounted up on top, but that's not always the case. Excuse me. Anyways. But yeah, I mean, and if we're talking about in a more civil environment, this could just be your CCW, your concealed carry weapon. So something that's concealed that you keep in your waist, and that's kind of how you gather reconnaissance on the day-to-day, regardless, because you always have your concealed carry on you.
Yeah.
So that's as simple as that. So armor is kind of a weird one, but you can do it. Obviously, people have used treated steel to line your door panels and things like that. Some guys stack fiberglass and resin, and you can create body armor that way. It's not super effective, but it does work, and it's going to be lighter than like a steel like coating your vehicle with steel.
Yeah.
This is going to get kind of Mad Maxy if you don't know what the heck you're doing. If you are pretty mechanically inclined and you understand how to remove door panels and actually like do it and where it's going to be all concealed, then you could probably do it pretty easily when no one would notice. And it's not going to be a red flag. Obviously, if the vehicle isn't set up to carry that load, someone who knows what the heck they're looking for is going to be able to tell that vehicle has way more weight on it than what normally it should have, just based off of suspension and tire pressure and things like that, like how much it's compressed. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's big, and that's a pretty important thing to be paying attention to from a reconnaissance perspective as well.
Yeah,
things like that.
It's like, man, that thing looks overburdened right now. Fuel. You're only as good as your vehicle, and if your vehicle can't operate, then you can't operate. In this mission. So, similar to your body, if you aren't, giving yourself water and food, you're going to eventually become unoperational. And that's going to be the same thing for fuel with your vehicle. Fuel is kind of a tough one because so many people just bank on the fact that they can just get fuel from the gas station whenever they want. And that may not always be the case. So something I always like to do, even in today's world, is like I try not to ever let my tank go. I try to fill it up if I get anywhere close to half. And I really don't like going under a quarter, just because you never know. You never know when the fuel cutoff is going to be. I also try to keep extra tanks of gas at home if I need to, so I can fill up. Something to keep in mind, not all gas, like where you fill up for gas, not all of them are going to just take your standard gas can to push them in. Some of them have like a valve basically farther down that gets depressed when you put in your gas. So if you were to just pour from outside, it's just going to end up back pouring toward yourself. So having like a siphon siphon hose, the ones I like have like the little ball in them that you can shake, and you don't have to like use air pressure to do it. You just shake them and it like pulls the fuel, and then once it pulls the fuel, it puts it into the tank. I like to use those for it for my truck, because my truck actually is that same way. Like I can't just use like just a standard gas can to fill up. It doesn't depress. It doesn't go far enough in there to depress the thing, and then it ends up backfilling toward me if I end up trying to put gas in there. So not all trucks have that. Like I also have a Ford that doesn't have that. So it's like it just depends on what kind of vehicle you have. So, but yeah, always have extra gas on hand, and then go through it because gas does go bad. Same with diesel. Always have diesel on hand. I know a lot of guys will have like big fill-up stations at their house, which if you can pull that off, super awesome. It's not everyone can do that because it gets a little expensive sometimes. You actually end up saving money in the long run, but it's like it takes a while before you actually see the profit of that. So, and I know a few people that have them, but I'm not like. I don't personally have that set up. I would love to have that set up. But
how long is that reasonably good for, though? Because fuel can get stagnant and stuff.
Well, if you're always using from that source, so if that's all you're, like, the people that I know that have it, at least, so the people I know that have it are either, some of them have it for diesel and some of them have it for gas. It depends on what kind of vehicles they run. The diesel ones, the guys that I know that have them for diesel, they operate a business that runs a lot of diesel, so they're always going through it, and so it's getting topped off. But if something were to pop off, it could just happen at bad timing when you needed another fill up, which there's nothing you could do to plan for that. But
right.
If it were to happen, like where you're halfway through that tank or almost full in that tank, then it's like, okay, we're obviously not doing business anymore at this point. We're going to prioritize these other things. And then you have all that fuel source. I don't know the actual limit on gas, like how long it lasts for and whatnot. I don't know the time frame on that. Someone probably does, but
it is limited though.
Yeah, it is limited. I've had gas in like my motorcycle. I've had gas in my motorcycle for an extended period of time, and I've still been able to use it. Like bad gas sometimes still runs. It's just like it's a little sputtery and kind of weird. So
yeah. It's like less potent.
You don't want to do it, but it's like if you had to, then you could, kind of thing.
And I know there's additives and stuff you can use that are supposed to kind of rejuvenate it and things like that. But
and then for the people that I know that run it for gas, they just fill up every day and they go through it in a certain amount of time, and they just have a scheduled refill up every time.
Okay, so that's what you're referring to. You're referring to they have a personal tank, like a gravity feed tank at their house, and then a fuel company comes and fills that tank up.
I don't even think it's gravity fed. I think it's electronic. Most of them.
Okay.
Like you have to flip a switch and
and
it's like a pump, just like a normal gas station, but it's like an external tank. It's not like underground like a gas station would be.
Right.
But yeah, the same people that fill up your gas, the gas stations that same company comes out and fills up your personal tank.
Yeah.
So
sweet.
But yeah, anyways, and those are usually like a 500-gallon tank or whatever you want.
Right.
But anyways, so that's pretty cool. Vehicle recovery equipment. So depending on where you live, this is going to be, some of the stuff is like a must-have, and some of it's like, okay, I can get away with this and maybe not that. You know what I mean? So
yeah. This is huge, by the way. Like this part right here. So many people look past it, but I'm glad we're going over it, because being able to self-recover and recover other vehicles is paramount.
Not even for this mission, but just in general. Like you should have some of the stuff in your personal vehicle, because if you can't help someone who's stranded on the side of the road, you're kind of wrong. But anyway, so vehicle recovery equipment. So your tow ropes, traction boards. Those are kind of like those. I don't know. They almost look like litters.
Yeah, like spine boards.
Yeah. But they just have like spikes. You can just shove them under the tires, and then basically it shoots down into the ground as your tires use it as traction to go back up. Hence the name traction boards. Tire chains. So that would be good like wintertime. Like if you're talking about lots of ice, you may not have the ability to just like switch to studded tires. They do have those screw-in studs as well. Those are kind of a little bit random. The only time I've ever used it is like on a track skid steer, which they actually were pretty effective on that. And then like your jacks or your high lifts. Some of your overland guys know the high lifts. Just understand how to use those, because they can be kind of dangerous depending on where you're at in your terrain and whatnot. They can kick out. So tire gauge, I think it's super important, and tire reamers. So tire reamers are basically like a fix-a-flat kit. That's important, because if you obviously lose pressure in your tire and you get it flat, then you're kind of screwed.
And those tire reaming kits, if you're not familiar with them, just look up a YouTube video on them. It's something anybody can do, and in some cases you can even do it without having to take the tire off the wheel.
Yeah.
So like if you're in a weird position where you like don't have time, or you're unable to remove the tire for whatever reason, you can, as long as you line it up so you can get to it, you can usually do it that way.
Yep.
So,
and then another thing is having an air compressor, because ultimately you can fix your tire all day long, but if you can't get air back into the tire, then you're kind of screwed. So that's a lot of companies make little air compressor kits. They make ones that hook into your lighter jack, if your vehicle even has it anymore. I don't know if all vehicles have that, but
like a lot of times the small like little electric ones are called tire inflators. That's literally what they're called.
Yeah.
Like I have one from Milwaukee, and it's super sick. You literally plug a battery into it, and push in the PSI that you want and hit go, and it just it'll just fill it to that point. It's awesome.
Yeah, they're super sweet. For your overland guys, a lot of those guys actually run compressors inside their engine compartment or inside the cab, and it's basically allows it. They can set the pressure that it'll be like interlinked into their tires, kind of similar to how we had in our MRAPs and MATVs and stuff like that, where it basically
CTIS.
Even if you were to get a flat, it like keeps it pretty much. You can operate on it.
Yeah, I mean, our military vehicles had running flats and stuff like that. But
so you can do something similar with that. It just gets pretty pricey. Something like just getting an external compressor that you can just plug in is going to be much cheaper for you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to go that route, then that's an option. Also, they sometimes just have compressors that you can just run a hose directly off that, but it's always linked in, which is kind of a good place to be. The reason behind that is because like guys will lower the pressure depending on like if they're dealing with rocky terrain, so they can get better grip and whatnot. So they'll get a little bit more surface area out of their tire by letting some air out, and then they can just pump it back up when they need a little bit more air pressure and they don't want to like pop their tire or whatever. But regardless, it's good for fixing flat. So, battery jumper. So like your portable battery jumpers, these things are getting smaller and smaller by the years.
It's crazy. And they'll do like 7 jumps now and stuff. Like, what in the world?
I have one that's not super small, but it works really well, so I like it. And there's no reason for me to get a different one. So,
a lot of them are battery banks too. So on top of like being a portable jumping battery, they'll have USB plugins and stuff on them, so you can charge your phone or do things like that with them,
which is super cool.
Cool.
Obviously, understand that if you're using it to like operate a bunch of your equipment and you do actually need it to like jump your truck, that's gonna be a problem. So like if you're running in a vehicle, then usually you have power through the vehicle, so it's kind of like but it's a backup. You know, it's a backup for multiple reasons. Where am I at? Battery jump well, for one, cables. I don't even know if I put that in here, but jumper cables are kind of smart to have. Like, if you don't have jumper cables, you're kind of like weird.
Dude, the amount of people I come across that are like, I need to jump. Like, do you have cables? I'm like, yeah.
Especially if you're operating with multiple vehicles. Like, if you're doing like a convoy type movement, it's like, why would you not have jumper cables?
Yeah.
Because like that's the easiest way to like jump a battery is, well, maybe not the easiest, but it's like, it's simple. A multimeter, so that's going to be able to tell currents and stuff like that. If you're not super electrically driven as far as like being able to deal with that, like that's something you're going to have to learn how to do if you want to even carry that. If you don't feel like learning that, then it's like the equivalent of people wearing or carrying like needle D's in their
medical gear,
med kit, and they have no how to. Yeah, it's just a waste of space at that point. But anyways, I feel like you should just know how to use that. Like, at least figure it out, and it's an easy skill to go out and try. Just like
YouTube University, man, it's you'll figure it out. Figure out the ohms and the
and I'm not even super smart with it. I can figure out like if something's getting power though. Or if it's not getting power. And it's like, okay, for whatever reason, something's jacked up here. An OBD scanner, I think that's super important nowadays because everything's done through a computer. So being able to just plug that in and run a diagnostics on your system is, unless you're running an older vehicle, which perhaps you, and it's probably easier to work on anyway. So if you're doing that, then awesome. But if not, then you're probably going to need this to figure out, like when you get a check engine light or whatever, you can plug it in and figure out what the heck's going on. Your like spare parts, so spark plugs, belts, fuses, things like that, I think are super important. You never know when those are going to go, so having backups ready to go. Most trucks or most vehicles come with backup fuses like in your fuse box. They'll just be off to the side, but if not, they at least have like empty spots that you can put them. So look at your fuse panel, decide, okay, I got a lot of 15s, or I got a lot of 10s, or I got whatever it may be, but just get backups of whatever you have a lot of, and then just always have backups for all your different numbers in there. So belts, same thing. If your belt breaks, then you're pretty much done. And some of this stuff's not going to be absolutely, it's not going to wrap over to all the vehicle types, but like pretty much everything has a belt that it runs off of. Of some sort. So belts are super important. Having fluids on board, oils, coolants, brakes, transmission, etc. Anything that you feel like you may need. Toolbox is like a must. So that's gonna have your like sockets, wrenches, drivers, multi-tools, things like that. I will say that
that can be a bag too. It doesn't have to be like an actual like big, truck bed toolbox. It can just be like a little compact bag that's strategically loaded.
Yeah, exactly. I would say that having tools that can do multiple roles is kind of important for this role, because when you're talking about all the gear that you're trying to carry in a vehicle, it can get pretty crowded pretty fast, especially if you're planning on having like other individuals in there with you.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you're dealing with a vehicle that's already small to begin with, it's kind of tough to fit all this stuff in there.
Yeah.
But depending on what you got going on as well, shovel, axe, saw, those are super important. You never know, like if a fallen tree comes across the road and you can't get past it, it's like, how clutch would it be to have a saw that you can actually clear out this tree out of the way?
Yeah.
And then zip ties, I think, are super important for setting things up, zipping panels back on or whatever, just doing like little fix-its on the fly, and then also just gear stuff in general. Duct tape, electrical tape, kind of the same thing. Grease is super important to have on board. You can do ball bearings and things like that with grease. Fire extinguisher, I think, is overlooked.
For sure.
Heavily.
Yep.
Having a fire extinguisher on board, you never know. I've been in a few vehicles that have caught fire, so it's like, it happens.
Dude, fire is a huge point of concern and something that should be considered greatly.
Yeah. I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for example, a lot of our military vehicles that we were kind of referencing earlier not only had fire extinguishers, but full-on fire suppression systems built into them.
Yeah.
That's a massive part about it. It's amazing how many people don't carry fire... what am I trying to say right now?
Fire extinguishers.
Yeah. Dude, what the heck? Fire suppression was just taking over my mind.
Suppressing
Don't
you.
carry fire extinguishers. And it's actually something that one of my really good friends was like, dude, do you carry a fire extinguisher in your car? And I was like, no. And this was like a little while back, but he's like, yeah, man, like you totally should. And he starts talking about it. And I'm like, man, why don't I? Like, it's a no-brainer. And they actually make different fire extinguishers for different types of fires. There's the chemical fire, which I think is the white fire extinguisher, and then like your red one is more for,
house.
Yeah, like more specific.
They have like the grease fire ones for kitchens and stuff like that. It's like a silver.
But they make really small, compact ones, and they're really cheap too. Fire extinguishers aren't very expensive, so definitely.
Yep. But yeah, there's probably more gear that you can have for that, but that's just like to kind of get the ball rolling. Observation equipment. So this is going to be preferably long range observation, because you are in a vehicle, being able to push that distance just by visual instead of having to get super close on the objective with the vehicle, I think is incredibly important. You can also gather intelligence close up by just blending in with the environment, like what we talked about in a more civil setting. Having night vision, I think, is incredibly important. Thermal optics, cameras, drones, stuff like that. All that stuff is much easier to carry with you in a vehicle operation versus like trying to carry it in a pack. You're going to be able to have all that stuff. You're going to be able to use it and operate it inside of the cab of your vehicle, which is, I think, just a must almost. Yeah. So for this mission, obviously you're trying to gather reconnaissance, so you got to be able to observe using equipment. So did you want to cover anything on that?
No, it's pretty, that's solid.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that's pretty self-explanatory,
Yeah. Night driving abilities, that's obviously something you want to think about. Because if you're talking about in a more wartime environment, more hostile, nighttime is the best time to move. We talked about this in depth when it comes to like moving individually, but the same applies while driving. They make infrared light bars that you're able to hook into your vehicle if you needed to, and then that would allow you to drive under night vision. Understand that is an LED output, so you're going to get that red kind of look out of that light bar, but it's not going to be nearly as bright as like just running headlights.
Yeah, you got to be really close to even pick up on it.
Yep. So similar to like your D2, the Steiner D2, that's an LED powered illuminator. So kind of similar to that same concept. If you've ever used one of those, it's going to be the kind of the same thing that you get out of those light bars. I think it's important to have red cab lights in those situations. That way, if you do need to turn on the cab light, you're operating in a red light. You can also just have red headlamps, which I think is even better. If you have like a poncho that's in the back, you can just throw a poncho over top in the back seat and then use your red headlamp if you do need to light up for whatever reason, if you're trying to look at a map or whatever it may be. Thermal camera and image. So this is where things get a little bit more expensive, but they do make in even civilian vehicles, because this is what the military used to drive around. Was a lot of times there's a thermal camera that was mounted on the outside of the vehicle, and then we had screens that would pop down, and basically you could drive under thermal during day or night. It doesn't really matter, but usually it was done at night, and it worked pretty well. It's basically like almost like driving on a video game, I would say, is like the best way to describe it. But they do make that nowadays for vehicles, and basically it flashes on your screen in the middle. It'll show you thermal imaging, and the reason behind it is so that way you don't hit like animals and stuff like that. But it's incredible how good the quality is on that. And if someone who is a little bit more techie than I could probably actually make it so you did actually have a screen that would pop down using that same display, and you could drive just fine underneath that or using that. But that's going to get pretty expensive, and I'm not going to sit here and say that that's a must in order to pull off. So even the light bar, the infrared light bar might not even be a must, but it's definitely something that I think is pretty cool and something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, if you're already investing in like handheld thermal units and stuff like that, you can just use those. Just know that you're going to have to roll your windows down, because you won't be able to see out the window with it.
Yeah. So individual sustainment, obviously you're going to have that on board. That's going to be like your water, food, hygiene, medical, stuff like that. You're going to have to be able to take care of yourself as well as others that you're with. So make sure that you can keep on keeping on, because ultimately, very similar to the fuel, if the fuel runs out, then you're going to be no good. But if your body runs out of fuel, then you're going to be no good as well. So getting into communications, a blessing and a curse all in the same. Understand your enemy, understand their capabilities, that they can find you based off of radio transmission. So, or I guess, radio waves in general. Yeah. So whether that's flying drones or whatever you may be doing, it's gonna put out a signature. But anyway, so understand that. But radios are very capable, especially when you're talking about convoys and stuff like that. Having radios that can communicate with each other is almost a must, because you're not going to have the whole hand and arm signal aspect. I mean, you could, but it would be kind of tough. And then getting into something that we kind of talked about with the SDRs, something that we've been playing around with is the Kraken, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, but it's basically an SDR that uses multiple antennas to be able to track down like locations of radio signal. So and it's become more and more popular. I've been seeing it all over the gram. And more guys are utilizing that skill. So having that capability, being able to run that into like a tough book or a tablet or whatever it may be, having that ability, I think, is almost a must, especially for your intelligence reconnaissance type vehicle. Being able to do counter reconnaissance, seeing like what kind of activity is going on in your AO. So, but yeah. Anything on that, Jacob?
No.
Do you want to flex on with the SDR or no?
No, not at this time. We got to get more. I want to get a little more knowledge in the area before I start speaking on it too much.
Yeah. So intel gathering, obviously.
Not at this time.
Yeah.
Later though, for sure.
Yeah. Intel gathering. So tough books, laptops. I kind of talked about this, but note-taking material. Obviously, having the ability to upload pictures and use your SDR and do all this stuff all this kind of techie type work. That's where the tough books and the laptops and all that stuff comes in kind of clutch. But I think it's incredibly important to be able to upload pictures and be able to like actually see them better. Because like on a camera screen, I don't know how many of you guys have seen on cameras, but they kind of suck to like look at like what you take a picture off their little LCD or LED like weird little tiny screen that they have. So being able to take that memory card and putting it into a laptop and actually pulling it up and actually zooming in and whatnot and seeing what the heck you're looking at, I think is super important if you're planning on using cameras. That's the same thing goes with drones too. You can use that with the drone footage. I think you can even run a drone directly into those devices as well. So
yeah,
just the more you know, and the more you can kind of use that as a benefit. Land navigation, so maps, GPSs, land nav accessories. That's going to be super important. Obviously, know your area that you're operating in. So that kind of helps as well. So whether that means that right now just start driving down trails and doing your passive reconnaissance as far as like figuring out, okay, I can access this by going this way, and I can actually get from this road to this road by taking this weird little like logging trail over to here,
Right.
Some of that stuff's not going to be on like your, Google Earth map. Like you're not going to be able to see it. It's just going to look like it's a wooded area that you can't get through until you like actually drive around and actually look for yourself.
Right.
Additional equipment that can help you out. That's going to be like roof racks. That'll help with like just overflow storage. You can use like boxes and stuff like that to strap down and whatnot. So things that you may not readily need, but you want to have on you just in case. That's a good way to do that. You're like overland trailers. I don't know if you've seen those, but they're basically just trailers that are kitted out that they can actually kind of go off road with you as well. That'd help with overflow. This is very overland driven, but I'm just touching it because I feel like people are gonna be mad that I did it. You're like rooftop tents, going back to like what Jacob was talking about.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a must because like I've slept in the back of Humvees and it's like not room. There's no room in there at all. And you can do it. So same goes for, I've slept in vehicles too and actually slept better in like a tiny little vehicle than I have in a Humvee. So, it's not a must, but if for whatever reason giving some guys some better sleep might be able to extend operations farther. So there's some, I guess, accuracy there. And then your whole downsized vehicles, like I was talking about, like your dirt bikes and snow machines, things that you can load up inside of a truck and then take and then downsize if you need to get into a little bit harder terrain that you may not be able to access with the vehicle you have. So, but yeah, that's kind of the equipment that I feel like is kind of a must to have, and there's probably more that you can add on there, but that's just to kind of get your mind heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think again, this is like most of our episodes are. Like this is a long form, kind of unedited just podcast where we have an outline and we kind of touch on things, but a lot of this is very basic stuff. Like it's intentional. We keep it that way to kind of give you enough information to build off of, and apply it to your own kind of situation and what you got going on. So, continuing in that direction, we're going to talk a little bit about vehicular movement and some patrolling basics, and some convoy TTPs. So, These are pretty basic, kind of going off of the old operational memory that I got from when we used to do this kind of stuff, but it's definitely a good foundation to kind of build off of. So very first thing when you're planning a convoy or you're going to do a movement, and actually let me back up for a second, talk about convoys. What is a convoy? Well, it's just it's very layman's terms. It's just a group of vehicles that are heading to the same place and they're doing it together. They're watching out for each other. They're moving coordinated together from point A to point B, whatever that may be. Not always going to be the best decision for the reconnaissance and surveillance side of things. A group of vehicles moving in coordinated effort together sticks out. So, but understanding some convoy basics and some just overall kind of big picture things, I think, is really important. And then again, it allows you to kind of break it down accordingly. So I'm kind of blast through these here. One is security measures. You got to be able to, again, it comes back to your planning, like have security measures in place. How are you going to protect your vehicles individually? Again, this goes beyond convoy. Like if you're going to have a vehicle that's probing, like a vehicle that's ahead of everybody, that's providing it's surveilling the objective or the area, whatever the case may be, and sending information back. Well, how are you securing that vehicle? Is it being done from, guys inside? Is it being done by another vehicle that's kind of overwatch that's nearby, like in a kind of an overwatch parking lot area or something? And what kind of response measures do you have to that? So security is always kind of the first place you start, and you got to think outside the box and you kind of play the what if game a little bit. You don't want to go crazy with it, but because you can't there's always inherent risk. You can't plan for every single thing. But there should just be fundamental planning around security measures. Communication protocols, that's another big one. How are you going to communicate with each other? Are you going to be using, is it an environment where you're able to use cell phones without much problem? Are you having to communicate on radios at like really low power and make sure you're not pushing too far? Directional antennas? Are you only able to use like signal mirrors or something? You don't know. Maybe lighting, flashing lights and stuff, or using IR to communicate. These are all things that are going to have to be established prior to doing any kind of movement, especially with vehicles. It's a lot harder to coordinate vehicles than it is to coordinate people because you're almost never in earshot of one another.
Yeah.
There's no vocal or hand and arm signal communication that's able to be had. So you're going to have communication procedures and protocols in place. And it needs to be understood by everybody, every vehicle that's in play. And that also applies to any dismounted elements that you could have operating with you as well. The next is going to be a pretty obvious one, your route planning and your route reconnaissance, which again, going back to the other episodes, we talked a lot about what route reconnaissance is. You could be doing the route reconnaissance with this probing vehicle. You could be pushing through and using it to kind of probe and figure out things. We're seeing that a lot right now in Ukraine, where you've got these civilian Ukrainian vehicles that are kind of pushing through and pushing kind of deep to figure out what's going on. And you've had a lot of weird situations with that too, where civilians have been just straight up getting killed because the Russians thought that, it was like some kind of reconnaissance effort.
Yeah.
So that's tough. But you can absolutely do this dismounted. And if you've got, kind of full circle reconnaissance mission of your area, which is how I view it happening. Like, especially if you're talking more combatant stuff, you've got serve sites, you've got you're feeding this information, and you've got your areas that you're able to, transition through with vehicles.
Absolutely.
Because you've already done your reconnaissance ahead of time. So that's gonna be huge. A big thing too with that is it's really frowned upon to plan a route that is same way in, same way out. You'll always have a different route to exfil and to leave. That's a pretty typical even over in Afghanistan, anytime we did vehicle operations, I was one of the people that often did the like route briefs and stuff like that for my platoon. I was one of the lead driver positions. So this was something that we did a lot. And you always have alternate routes planned. And often you plan them for situations. So like if we hit an ID, this is now what we're doing. If we do this, this will happen. If we get to the objective and we get new intel and we got to go here's the route we're going to take. There's a lot of things that are pre-developed, and that can only be done if you have a really good understanding of the current intel in the area, and that's only done by having good reconnaissance.
Yeah.
So that's where I think that dismounted reconnaissance plays nicely into this. But again, if you're using a vehicle to gain that reconnaissance that you don't already have, then you need to use the whatever current capabilities that you have, whether that be like if you're talking about your own area that you're operating in, then it's a given. You should have a good understanding of the area that you're operating in. We've talked about this in previous episodes.
Yeah.
There's no reason why you shouldn't have a memorized, detailed understanding of your local area within a 5 block mile radius.
Yeah.
5 square mile is what I think what we ended up saying, which is a huge area, but you live here. You live where you're at. So you have the ability to start figuring that out now. I should be able to be anywhere within a 5 square mile radius of where I live in the area I operate in. And I should know by memory. I shouldn't have to get out my phone and use Google Maps. I should know just by memory how to get home or get wherever.
Yep.
So,
and multiple ways to get there.
Yeah. Yep. Number 4 is convoy formations. So this gets a little bit specific, and I'm not going to actually spend a ton of time here because I think this makes more sense getting into a vehicle operations podcast episode that we'll do in the future. We definitely will. We've just been kind of focusing on reconnaissance for now. But it does apply. So you need to be able to select appropriate formations. This is more, again, it's for a convoy. So if you're operating in conjunction with other vehicles, there are convoys that are going to work really good. Now what's going to blend in? Well, your single column formation will. And that's exactly like, replace, if you're talking about a file formation, if you've listened to our formations podcast in the past about talking about people, just replace the people with cars, dude. And you're basically there. So, and this is all talking about ground vehicles, by the way. I'm not getting into aerial formations, which you usually have a 2-piece or a 4-piece formation there. But it's very different, and I'm not an authority figure and don't have any knowledge about that at all. Yeah. So we're going to avoid that. We're talking about the ground today. We're staying grounded. So, so your single column formation, it's going to be vehicles follow one another, and you have good spacing in between each vehicle. So that could be very different. If you're trying to move fast and light, and go from point A to point B in a flash, then you're going to be probably closer together.
Yeah.
You're going to be within that 25 meter to 50 meter distance. So that might not sound super close, but that's actually pretty close. If you're moving carefully, and if you're trying to maintain some kind of a little bit of covert, you're trying to keep a low profile, then way more distance, and maybe even in some cases allowing other vehicles that aren't in play in between your formation. That's usually a big no-no when you're talking about combat vehicles, but I'm not really talking about a combat scenario. I'm talking about a reconnaissance scenario where it may just be like a more non-permissive environment, or like or maybe you're doing reconnaissance on something like human trafficking or something. If you're involved in that and you're involved in your world today, well, having some large spacing, maintaining good communication, and allowing some people to intermingle in your convoy isn't the end of the world, as long as you maintain that control and you've pre-planned that stuff in your route planning.
Yep.
Staggered column, that's if you're going to like take over a road. Like we did this stuff a lot where you're going to barge down a road and you're like, nothing else is on the road when we're coming through. Well, you've got it's just like with dismounted, you've got a vehicle on the right side of the road leading the charge, and then right behind them alternating on the left side, and it alternates all the way back. So you're just taking up the full width of the road and you're smashing through. Pretty awesome. You can maintain good security that way. There's some obvious disadvantages though. One of them is if you're in an environment where you're worried about booby traps like IEDs, improvised explosive devices on the road. You don't want to be doing that. You want to follow in the tracks of the vehicle that's in front of you because you have less chance of hitting something. So if you're just going down, bombing down both sides of the road, then you can get yourself in trouble. Now, overseas, we would do this on our heavily controlled routes, like one that comes to mind for me is Route Chainsaw. It was literally a road that the U.S. government paved to cut down on IDs and stuff like that, and we'd get on that road and start ripping. I mean, we'd get those Max Pros moving, dude.
Yeah.
We'd just be hovering. You'd feel them just, just going like 70 miles an hour, which is crazy in those things, and just ripping. You're like, dude, if we make one little mistake, we're going to be tumbling, and it's going to suck. All 26 and a half tons of this vehicle is going somewhere,
Yeah.
Excuse me. But, yeah, so the stagger column can be beneficial. Stagger column's going to stick out a lot. It's going to look pretty
aggressive,
weird.
Yeah.
So again, this is going to go more towards that reconnaissance by force. Like if you're the big player in an area, and you want to just smash about and just kind of let people know that you're there to shut down all the annual purge activities, then dude, smash about. That's pretty cool. But pretty limited, I think, in the reconnaissance perspective. And just if you want to jump in anywhere, jump in, dude, because I'm just ripping.
You're doing good.
So
I'm just listening.
Here's a formation I've used one time in my military career, and it was probably one of the coolest things we've ever done. But it's very niche and very rare, I think, for vehicles, and that is actually the wedge formation. You can straight up wedge out with vehicles and smash through. Now, if you're going to move through like a big open area, and again, this is like a lot more aggressive, a lot more overt. This would be like, here we
that's
come.
the most U.S. Army commercial
movement
I've ever.
Yeah, dude. Army strong.
It's just showing like all these MRAPs just wedged out, like going across a big desert.
Yeah. Yeah, we used it one time. We were literally hunting down a guy that was like the leader of this IED cell, and he was trying to get back across the Pakistan border, and we literally like barged through this village, like smashing through fields and like running over small structures and stuff, like in the wedge, which was pretty crazy. And then we had we were doing a joint operation with 3rd Bat, or the Ranger Battalion, and they were dismounted, like coming up the other side, and we ended up like circling around, and we like wedged out with them, like on their perimeter with our vehicles. Which was crazy. So they were like wedging through like the more narrow parts of the village, and we had like their security as like the extension of their wedge with our vehicles, which is kind of cool. Crazy. So we were like, yeah. Afterwards they were like, dang, I don't think we've ever had I don't think we've ever had vehicles in the wedge with us before. That was kind of cool. It was fun. Anyways, but it's great for visibility. It's awesome for like open maneuverability. You can maneuver into a lot of different formations out of that. Amazing for fire superiority. Like if you are barging around with mounted weapons, you can do a lot from the wedge, just like the regular wedge formation.
Yep.
It opens up the positioning so you can shoot past each other with relative ease and without much risk. So diamond formation, same kind of thing here. I actually don't really like this formation a whole lot. I rarely used it. Biggest time you're going to see it being used is if you're going to fill up an area and kind of take it over security wise. So this is starting to really get both of the wedge and the diamond start to really, and the next one, which is the box formation, which I'll talk about in a second. They really start to get out of the reconnaissance realm, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Other than, I will say, for diamond and box, which I'll get to box in a second, other than if you're static. So where the diamond comes in really handy is if you're going to be basically setting up a patrol base, which a vehicular patrol base is a thing. And you set up a little perimeter and you kind of operate out of it. And Now, if you're covert, you can do this with multiple vehicles. Where's a good example of this working? In a parking lot with other vehicles. You can have a diamond formation set up pretty easily, and you can actually pull a lot of really, really good reconnaissance out of that, especially if you're, I don't mean like, all right, you got a parking space here, and then 2 parking spaces over, you got your other guy. And then I'm talking like you're literally on all sides of the parking lot. You're in this big formation. So you know where each other is. You're in that setup formation. You've got your comms figured out. And you're going to be static, and you're going to be observing. This is really where the diamond formation, I think, could be pretty advantageous. And then you're able to just maneuver right out of that and kind of fall back in with each other in whatever formation you think is necessary. The box formation is exactly what it sounds like. You're making a rectangle with your vehicles. You've got a vehicle on each corner. It's primarily used for like security. If you're going to secure a vehicle that you need to escort or something like that, you can surround them and move through, and you just kind of, it's basically like anytime we would do this, we would kind of get more into like a compact staggered column with our vehicles, and then you'd have your escort vehicle in between that. So you've got basically like 2 vehicles up front and 2 in the back, but they're a little bit more staggered column. I don't really like the idea of being side to side, because then you're blocking off sectors of fire and observation as well. But again, that's why understanding all these different formations is important. There's a few others. There's some variations of formations, especially for like how you park on the side of a road. You've got like the herringbone and different things like that, but we're not going to get into those today. But those are some basic formations that you can play around with. The one you're going to use pretty much all the time, and it just is the one that makes the most sense, and that's your single column. Variations of it, playing around with spacing's huge. Understanding that needs to be pre-coordinated, that needs to be pre-planned, whatever spacing you're going to use, and you need to try to adhere to it. You can have some flexibility, especially if you're trying to remain unidentified, because if you're really strict and structured in that area, you're going to start to stick out by somebody that really knows what they're looking for. So you can have some variation and some play, also intermingling in the formation, allowing it to change a little bit. Like, the number 2 Vic might become the number 3, and the number 3 becomes number 2. You kind of play around with that a little bit. You can do some of that kind of stuff. But you can really, you'd be surprised, especially if you're operating in a road system that still has vehicles in it, which is, in my opinion, probably the better situation to use vehicular reconnaissance. Yeah. So for example, the reason I say that is if you needed to do reconnaissance now, if you try to go lay in a serve site in a populated area, that's going to stick out a lot more than if I just go put a serve site in with vehicles. Yeah. You're not going to be noticed in vehicles. So this is why this vehicular reconnaissance starts to dovetail a lot more into like civil side stuff. Yeah. Modern day reconnaissance. Okay, so getting out of formations, there's a quick little breakdown, but just kind of in summary, you need to have these pre-selected and have a plan for them. And then kind of on that, your next part of the plan is your react to contact. If you do get blown, and this could be straight up contact, like you're getting shot. This could be like, oh, we've been, interdicted or compromised in some way. What's your reaction to that? What are you going to do? Pretty straightforward. You need to understand fighting in and out of vehicles. Completely different sides of the book when it comes to armored vehicles and soft skin vehicles. Yeah. Very, very, very different. There's a lot of stuff on Instagram. Well, let me say, if you have an armored vehicle, trust the armor, fight from in the vehicle. You're probably going to do better. You can smash around with that thing. If it's a true armored vehicle, that's built to be a up armored vehicle of some kind, you're going to be better off fighting from within the confines of that armor. Yeah. Probably a very capable platform. Completely opposite end of the spectrum. If you have a soft skin vehicle, like you're just using your civilian rig, don't fight from within the vehicle. That's a bad thing to do.
Yeah, the old death trap, dude.
The old coffin, man. The old car coffin. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff out there on Instagram that people are pushing about, like shooting out their front window and doing a bunch of engagements. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't know how to do that, but that stuff is really, like, you start looking at the data. Where's data on this? Look at law enforcement situations. And and it's not hard to find. Like, you can start doing some research. I encourage you to go do some research. Actually, somebody that's pretty good source and someone that may be worth looking into that's covering these kinds of things would be centrifuge training.
Yeah.
He's heavily focused on law enforcement training in and around vehicles. And he's talking about like what the data shows as far as, you know,
angles game is
survivability.
Is super important as well. Like,
yep.
You know, if you're getting ambushed from high up, closing the distance so that way they're not, you know, just shooting into your windshield and things like that. It's like little, but it's like, man, unless you like looked it up and researched every little individual thing, it would be hard to remember all that unless you had it like pretty locked in.
Yeah. With soft skin stuff, escape and evasion is going to be huge for you. Using what that vehicle's good at doing, and that's getting from point A to point B and doing it quickly. Instead of sitting there trying to fight outside of a funneled point of interest where all the rounds are just being focused on that, and then you could have multiple threats. Get the heck out of there. If your vehicle's disabled, well, then it's time to ditch that vehicle. We got to try to get outside of that vehicle so we can maneuver dismounted. So that's really your biggest changes there. And again, this is a whole other conversation, so we'll save this for a different episode, but very different perspectives from the armored side and then the soft skin side, the non-armored side. Yeah. So that needs to be pre-planned. Vehicle maintenance stuff, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. We kind of already got into that, but that's a huge part of this. You have to have checks in place. You can't just be willy-nilly. Like, you need to know that your vehicle is going to last a long time. It's going to be reliable, because that's a whole other variable that once you get outside on your mission and you're doing your thing, if you got a vehicle breakdown, it changes everything. But it's something that can happen, and you should probably plan for that too. But having regular maintenance checks and having like standards, like if you have, your standard could be like, hey, if any vehicle has a check engine light on, then it doesn't apply, unless we have one of those readers and we can identify what that is. But you could just have some hard lines like that, like, oh, it's no longer eligible to be mission ready, and that's important to have some policies in place for that. Just some individual training for people. You got to understand how to drive. I know that sounds dumb, but it sounds weird, but some people suck at driving. I'm just going to outright say it. Like, that driver's seat is important. It needs to be somebody that can make quick decisions. It needs to be somebody that understands how to really has good spatial awareness of the vehicle. I don't know. There's a way, like, if you do a lot of driving and you've done a lot of more kind of dynamic driving, you kind of just have this, you start to develop the spatial awareness of your vehicle where you can just get the edges of your vehicle really close to things, and not hit it. And it's not a big deal. Like, a big tell of this is, in a way to test it, is put somebody in a precarious parking situation and be like, all right, pull out of here. The guy that can do like one backup and then do a really tight turn and get super close to their vehicle and get out in one foul swoop, that's the guy with good spatial awareness. The guy that backs up and does like an 18-point turn and is still like 3 feet away from the vehicle every time that he's worried about touching, that's not good spatial awareness. Yep. Sorry, that guy's not going to be as good of a driver as the other guy. That spatial awareness is a big thing. Also, complacency. I can't tell you how many times I'll be driving down the road and I'll see one of my buddies and I'll give him like a wave or a salute or something, and they're just literally looking at me but not seeing me and just driving by, and I'll immediately text them and be like, what are you doing? You're so complacent right now. So anyways, but putting training things in place, especially if you do see like vehicle operations is something that you really want to like be doing, then that's a whole other can of worms. But personal training's big. But marksmanship stuff, it sounds weird, but if you haven't shot outside like of your vehicle, practice shooting outside of your vehicle. And I don't necessarily mean like the defensive shooting out the front windshield. I mean, that's cool. I think maybe everybody should try to do that, and just to kind of validate some personal info and get some detail in that way. But I'm more talking like, maybe a tripod setup in the back of your car or something, like a more like hide shooting kind of situation where you're shooting out the back window, like you're shooting out the side window or whatever. Play around with it. It's a lot of fun, and It's very different from other types of shooting. So
yep.
Also, just posting up on the side of your like on the side of your window, like lofting the gun on the side of the window and pressing into the A-frame or whatever and just shooting that way like that. Just play around with that. Shooting on the move, super important. If you have to beat feet and you're in that situation where you're blown, you're compromised, and you got to rip out of there, you might have to death blossom a little bit. Death blossom's what we called it when like you're compromised, you're being ambushed, whatever, and you just get barrels out the window and start ripping, and everyone's just shooting and trying to identify targets, and you're just making enough space and enough violence of action to give you enough room to escape and evade.
Yeah.
That takes practice. So do it safely. Don't be stupid. Do it dry first, get some dry iterations in. Make sure you really be careful with that. I'd like to do some content on that, actually.
That would be cool.
But yeah, it's good stuff, especially with how often we're in and out of vehicles. This is a huge one for if you're talking about your hostile environment. This is just a part of warfare now, and that's counter IED measures. Yep. So IEDs are going to be always used. I mean, they've been booby traps, explosive devices, different things like that have been used for
ever.
I mean, years and years and years and years now, like well over, hundreds of years ago, back into even like, the Roman days and stuff where guys are cruising around on chariots and you had, wire booby traps and stuff like that get set up and devices that they could throw into the wheels to cripple them and, all that stuff. IEDs, improvised explosive devices. They're not hard to figure out how to make. They're actually really easy to make. And I'd say some of the materials necessary are a little bit harder to get here in America than in other places. But, dude, even just a big old tub of tannerite and a well-placed shot can turn into an IED on you really quick.
Yep.
You need to understand how to identify things that look out of place. This I'm not going to get into details here because it varies so greatly depending on where you're at and what's common. It could be anything. I mean, we saw over in Afghanistan, they really perfected IEDs. We saw everything from dead bodies, like carcasses, like dead animals,
yep.
Dead people, trash bags, even like what looked like drainage systems that were added in that were completely fake. They weren't even real. And you start looking around and you're like, there's no irrigation here. That seems weird. Actual drainage systems, culverts and stuff, which were just, you had to get out and clear them on foot. Like there's things that you'd have to just stop your convoy, get out and check. And you'd be blown away at the amount of times that we found IEDs. I would say if we saw something that was kind of weird on the side of the road, the chances were higher it would be an IED than they weren't for the area we were in. It was a hot spot for it. Our platoon found so many IEDs. It was crazy. It was nonstop. It got to the point where you got tired of it. Like you'd hear the dude come on the radio and be like, see something in the road. I'm going to dismount and go check it out. And you'd literally go, it'll be an IED and we'll be here. And then, 10 minutes later, like, yep, call EOD. We've got an IED in the road, and you're just like, okay, we're gonna be here for 7 hours waiting on EOD now. Yep. And then EOD would come and deal with it, and then you'd go 10 feet down the road and find another one, and you're just like, no. It was nonstop. We're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing it in over in Israel right now. We're seeing it all over Ukraine.
Yeah.
Improvised explosive device, booby trap kind of style stuff is going to be a forever used thing. So finding ways to identify that, do your homework. That's probably its own podcast. I did an absolute ton of IED countermeasure training and IED detection stuff. We went through like countless classes, especially as one of the drivers for mounted operations, but it's a deep topic. Yeah. So, that kind of brings us to the meat and potatoes of the actual operation itself. And we'll just kind of breeze through this because a lot of it's kind of the same, but
yeah, most of it's the same, which is kind of makes it easy. A lot of this stuff's the same. It's just a different environment and different equipment being used, basically.
Yeah, but I think you can kind of, now that you kind of have that foundation, you'll be able to apply this stuff a lot easier. And yeah, if we're moving kind of quick, just know that like this is intended to be that foundation, like I mentioned before. Like we want you to really take this stuff and go start pursuing your own homework, and because then you can apply it specifically to your environment and your situation and your vehicles that are available and so on and so forth. But so when you're doing your operation, obviously the very first thing you got is your planning. Duh. First thing you do when planning an operation is plan the operation. So you got to clearly define what objectives you have. So what are you going to be surveilling?
Yeah.
Is it a specific target? Is it a force? Is it a individual? Is it an area? Are you doing your area reconnaissance? Is it a route that you need to identify? Figure that out. That needs to be clearly identified. Then we need to develop a plan that has all the things in place that we just talked about. So basically, your whole list that we just went through. So security measures, communication, route planning, convoy formation. What are you going to do in your active contact, vehicle maintenance, all that stuff that needs to be developed and detailed and made available to everybody that's going to be on this operation with you.
Yep.
So starting with your main objective, and then all the things that go into that planning criteria, your MET-TC considerations, all that stuff, and then piggyback that with your whole vehicle operations TTP plan. Okay, so then you get into your equipment. So equipment setup. What kind of equipment do you need? A lot of this is going to be made apparent by what you're surveilling. So surveillance tools, your binoculars, your spotting scopes, maybe it's your weapon-mounted optics, cameras. Cameras are super valuable. We've talked about it on the other episodes, and if you haven't listened to those episodes, I don't even know if we've said this yet. It should be apparent, but go check those episodes out because a lot of the super fundamental parts of surveillance and reconnaissance are covered in those previous episodes. Recording devices. So having a way to record things that might not even be electronic, that could just be documentation stuff like your logs, your notebooks. We've talked about the importance of that. More civilian side, dude, dash cams. Dash cams are so normal now, and they're so prevalent, and it's very important. They could give you a lot. And they have them where they're set up. They're really cheap too. You can buy them and they're front and back facing, and they're all the stuff. If you start looking in like the Uber driver market, you'll find some very affordable, very capable dash cams. Your cell phones. Cell phones are great devices too, if they're available and able to be used in more kind of a today world, or maybe maybe things have gotten a little bit more tyrannical, but you're still able to live life relatively normally. I think stuff like that works really good. Excuse me. Anything to add on equipment?
You went over vehicle selection.
Oh, I actually skipped vehicle selection. Sorry about that. Yeah, well, we can just keep focusing on equipment, and then we'll go back to vehicle selection.
Yeah, honestly, just a lot of that equipment that I covered. Just obviously, you may not need all of it, but that gives you a pretty good, well-rounded list, and we kind of covered a couple different like main categories that you could fill gear into to help that, I guess, help be successful in that area. But other than that, no, I don't really have anything.
Yeah, and this would also, you'd also get into if you were going to make like a little intra-vehicle hide site, whether that was like with mesh or tinted windows, or like we talked about the little that to me
the old baby screen
makes the most sense. The old baby sunscreen, dude. You can shoot through that too. So, it'd be awesome. But vehicle selection, I accidentally skipped over that one. So we talked about all kinds of different vehicles, but bottom line needs to be something that blends in with the environment. It can't stick out. If it sticks out, you're breaking the number one rule of reconnaissance, which is being identifiable. For example, if you're just barging around in a vehicle that's got like
we the people.
Yeah, we the people, the Montana Minutemen or whatever, then that's going to be dumb. So be wise. And think about it in all directions. So if you're operating in an environment where friendly fire is a problem, like I think about Ukraine and Russia, then maybe it is important to have like your Ukrainian flag painted on your roof or whatever. So there's pros and cons to everything.
Punisher skull.
Whoa.
Painted on your
so crazy, dude. It's got to blend in though. Blend into your environment. You got to avoid anything that's attracting attention. So, that's all situational, but definitely got to be something that doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. So, All right. So distance, we talked a little bit about maintaining distance. That's really important. Whatever you brief and whatever you plan that is part of that, adhere to it. There can be some variation, but it needs to be pre-planned because it's hard to communicate from vehicle to vehicle, especially if you can't use comms. If you're trying to not pollute the airwaves and you're trying to stay, radio silent, it makes it a lot harder if vehicles start just doing random stuff. So you need to have as much pre-planning as you can. And it's why like operating different vehicles for different things kind of makes sense too. You can even identify that like, hey, the blue Corolla is going to be our probing. It's going to be our primary vehicle for reconnaissance. It's going to be forward doing all the stuff. And then this guy in this vehicle is the Overwatch. And then this guy in this vehicle, the big diesel, whatever, that's all kitted out. It's going to be kind of laying low. We're going to keep it parked in this, under this canopy, but it's the QRF vehicle or whatever. You can have, as long as it's predetermined and whatever your distance is. Now, if you're rolling convoy, that distance is important. I'm going to talk really quick about distance. If you're too close together, then an aerial asset's going to make quick work of you. You're all dead. If you're too far apart, well, then you lose track of each other, and then you can't figure out where each other is, and you're all screwed up.
Yep.
So you're just basically hanging out and blending a balance between. Same with IEDs. Like if you're too close to a vehicle that hits an IED, well, you could be affected too. So, kind of straightforward, but not something that your common day, everyday person thinks about. So, observation. You need to be observing and have plans in place to observe. You're observing everything. You need to be careful doing so. So you don't want to just be rolling down your window and sticking your camera out. You got this big lens coming out, this big spotting scope coming out the side of your window. This goes back into having you're blending in, but you've got camouflage considerations in place. That could just be a tinted window, that could be a sunshade, whatever. But you maybe you're using like hidden cameras. I mean, there's a ton of variation here, but you can't be so obvious. You can't just be going for it. But there are also situations that maybe you can be obvious. If you're posing as like a bird watcher and you're in an area where that's common, and you're just out taking pictures of random birds, and then every once in a while you look across the parking lot and it takes pictures of the corrupt senator or whatever. I'm just kidding. Whoa. Whatever the case may be.
State,
dude.
Just
what?
The movie Enemy of the State.
Yeah, dude. These are all things that are important. So, got to pay attention to that. And again, you're not trying to stick out. So communication, we've already talked on communication quite a bit, but that needs to be well figured out. If you're not able to communicate, then by using radios or cell phones or whatever, well, then you better have a well thought out plan to be able to do that. So that's a huge one. So keeping documentation and recording your findings. This is the whole point of reconnaissance. This better be something that's being done. This starts immediately. This starts as soon as you leave. So even en route, there's things you come across. We've talked about this in other episodes, but don't get tunnel visioned on your objective. Something could be going on right over here that you're bypassing because you're so obsessed with this one thing you're trying to see.
I think that's why it's important to not always just be like solo in your vehicle and having...
Yeah, you need a team in the vehicle, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's why the military is really big on vehicle crews. So you've got a driver, you've got a truck commander who's your passenger, you've usually got a gunner, and then you've usually got a dismounted element.
Yep.
You're able to cover all the things. Now, if you go more covert, then yeah, you've usually got guys that handle all the dismount. You've got a guy running comms. You've got a guy that's kind of navigating, which would be like your TC, and then you've got a driver, and that's a few guys,
Truck commander.
So yeah, the old TC, dude. So it's important. It's important to have a crew of guys, and everyone should have a job, and they should understand what their job is. If you've got someone whose sole job is recording and documentation, then they need to be doing it immediately upon start of the mission. Rotation and relief. So you got to be able to, especially if you're talking long-term stuff, like we go back to the parking lot analogy. You set up this big parking lot. You've got your little vehicles set up in there. Maybe you move them periodically so they don't stick out too much, so people don't start identifying them. Those are all things that you predetermine. But at some point, you're going to have to rotate out. You're going to have to relieve those guys. We're not talking about like every couple hours. We're talking days probably. Yeah. You can live outside that vehicle for a while, but at some point you're going to burn them out, and they're just going to be sitting on that objective too long, and they're just looking at their glass. They're not even looking at anything. They're just becoming part of the environment at that point.
They're just slowly becoming a vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's huge. Have contingency vehicles if you can, and you can hear how vast this starts to get. And that's why it's very specific to, definitely groups. Like we mentioned a lot. If you're dealing with only a handful of guys, you got 2, 3, maybe 4 guys.
In the civil setting, you can do it, but
yeah, but even then though, like long-term vehicle-based reconnaissance is going to get tough.
Yeah.
There's a lot of coordination in place, and you need a lot of different moving pieces. So, your sniper cell kind of more setups might work better, and you can still operate a small cell out of one vehicle and apply all these things. Yeah. But it's just going to be shorter operating stints, just like it would be if you were a sniper cell.
Yep.
So, and then finally, security measures. So, it's kind of funny because you apply security measures before anything else, and you're planning your convoy and your vehicle operation, but you kind of revisit it specifically to the reconnaissance planning. So what's your, and it kind of covers everything. What are you going to do with any potential threats? Your reaction to contact stuff. What do you do if you get compromised or you assume you're compromised? All these things factor in. What's your blowout plan? For escape and evasion and stuff like that.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff will apply to like our previous episode as far as like having like range cards. Like if you're actually stationary, you can actually set up a range card within the vehicle as well, as far as like figuring out distances from what you can see in certain directions. So and just like what we talked about, taping it up near the window, you can just tape it up on each door panel, depending on which spot you are in the vehicle. If you have a 4-man group in a vehicle, obviously you're looking out different windows, so your range cards are going to be different depending on what you're seeing. So, but yeah, I think obviously security is usually number one in everything that you do. You always want to have security. That's like the first thing that you prioritize, but you got to revisit it multiple times throughout a mission, because you never want to get lax in that area. You want to always make sure that you're on your A game.
Yep. But absolutely. Well, that pretty much wraps up vehicular reconnaissance. Again, introduction to it, kind of laying down the foundation for it. But you can absolutely see how it's very applicable to necessary skills, I think, for that modern Minuteman.
Yeah.
It's the modern day horse, like.
Yep.
It's how
I didn't even get into horses.
Whoa. Yeah, dude.
Whoa.
That's a biological transportation is a thing. But dude, I'm telling you, like, this is the, we always reference make the cute little Minuteman references, like, you hear it all the time, but modern day musket and like modern day this and that. It's like, yeah, dude, like that's the modern day horse. Transportation now is the old car. So, and all these other vehicles that we have access to in today's world. So definitely part of the capability, and should be absolutely considered, especially in environments where you have a little more flexibility. I think it can give you a lot more natural concealment and something that doesn't stick out so much.
Yeah.
So,
well, perfect, dude. Well, we're gonna button this thing up.
Let's button it up.